The industrial world of Chemos bore little resemblance to the paradise worlds that would later define the Emperor's children's aesthetic sensibilities. Shrouded in perpetual smog from countless manufactorums and mining operations, the planet's surface was scarred by millennia of resource extraction and industrial development. Towering hive cities pierced the polluted atmosphere, their upper reaches disappearing into the chemical fog that blanketed the world. It was here, in this harsh environment of perpetual twilight and mechanical thunder, that Lucius first drew breath. Born into one of Chemos' noble houses, Lucius emerged from the planet's warrior aristocracy, a caste that had evolved to maintain order among the teeming billions of industrial workers. The noble houses of Chemos were not merely political entities, but martial dynasties, each maintaining their own private armies and dueling traditions. These warrior nobles were expected to demonstrate their superiority through combat prowess, engaging in ritualized duels that served both as entertainment for the masses and as a means of settling disputes between the great houses. From his earliest years, Lucius displayed an uncanny aptitude for bladework that set him apart even among Chemos' martial elite. Where other young nobles struggled to master basic sword forms, Lucius moved with an almost supernatural grace, his blade becoming an extension of his will. His instructors, hardened veterans of countless industrial conflicts and noble feuds, found themselves increasingly challenged by their young pupils' rapid advancement. By his 10th year, Lucius had already begun defeating opponents twice his age in formal duels, his technique refined to a degree that bordered on the impossible for one so young. The dueling academies of Chemos were ancient institutions, their halls echoing with the clash of steel and the teachings of sword masters whose lineages stretched back centuries. Within these hallowed chambers, Lucius absorbed not merely the mechanical aspects of swordplay, but the philosophy that underpinned Chemosian martial culture. Victory was not simply about defeating an opponent, it was about demonstrating absolute superiority in every aspect of combat. A true master did not merely win, but did so with such overwhelming skill that their opponent was left in no doubt of their inferiority. This philosophy resonated deeply with Lucius's developing psyche. He began to view each duel not as a contest, but as an opportunity to showcase his inherent superiority. His victories became increasingly elaborate displays of skill, with Lucius deliberately prolonging encounters to demonstrate techniques that lesser swordsmen could never hope to master. Opponents found themselves toyed with, their every move anticipated and countered with contemptuous ease. The young noble's reputation grew, and with it, his arrogance. The warrior culture of Chemos demanded constant improvement, a relentless pursuit of martial perfection that drove its adherents to ever greater heights of skill. For most, this pursuit was tempered by the reality of their limitations, but Lucius seemed to possess no such boundaries. His natural talent, combined with an obsessive dedication to training, produced results that defied conventional understanding. He would spend entire days in the practice halls, working through sword forms with mechanical precision, each movement refined until it achieved a level of perfection that satisfied his increasingly demanding standards. As Lucius matured, his reputation spread beyond the confines of his own noble house. Challenges arrived from across Chemos, as sword masters and champions sought to test themselves against the young prodigy. Each challenger was met with the same result: decisive defeat at the hands of a swordsman whose skill seemed to transcend normal human limitations. These victories were not mere displays of superior technique, but demonstrations of an almost artistic approach to combat. Lucius fought with a fluidity that transformed violence into something approaching beauty, his blade weaving patterns of death that mesmerized even as they destroyed. The arrival of the Emperor and his great crusade forces brought dramatic change to Chemos. The world's integration into the growing Imperium marked the end of the old noble house's autonomy, but it also presented opportunities for those with exceptional abilities. The recruitment of Chemos' finest warriors into the Third Legion represented the ultimate validation of their martial culture, and none were more eager to prove themselves worthy than Lucius. The transformation from baseline human to Astartes might have diminished a lesser warrior, the radical physical and psychological changes overwhelming their established skills. For Lucius, however, the enhancement process merely provided a superior vessel for his already exceptional abilities. The increased reaction times, enhanced strength, and improved coordination that came with his new physiology elevated his swordplay to levels that would have been impossible in his previous form. What had once been superhuman skill became something approaching the divine. Within the Third Legion, Lucius's reputation preceded him. The Emperor's children prided themselves on perfection in all its forms, and the young warrior from Chemos embodied this ideal in its purest expression. His integration into the Legion's command structure was swift, his obvious talents earning him rapid promotion through the ranks. Where other newly inducted Astartes struggled to adapt to their enhanced capabilities, Lucius seemed to have been born for this existence. The Legion's training regimens, designed to push even enhanced warriors to their limits, proved insufficient to challenge Lucius's abilities. His fellow Astartes, themselves drawn from warrior cultures across the galaxy, found themselves consistently outmatched by the former noble of Chemos. Training sessions became exhibitions of Lucius's superiority, his blade work so refined that it served as instruction for his battle brothers, even as it demonstrated their inadequacy. Fulgrim's return to lead his legion marked a pivotal moment in Lucius's development. The Primarch's own pursuit of perfection resonated deeply with the young Astartes, who saw in his Gene father a kindred spirit committed to the same ideals that had driven him since childhood. Fulgrim's emphasis on excellence in all endeavors, from combat prowess to artistic achievement, provided a philosophical framework that elevated Lucius's natural arrogance into something approaching religious devotion. The Primarch quickly recognized Lucius's exceptional abilities, elevating him to positions of increasing responsibility within the Legion's hierarchy. This recognition was not merely acknowledgement of skill, but validation of Lucius's belief in his own superiority. Each promotion reinforced his conviction that he was destined for greatness, that his abilities set him apart from his peers in fundamental ways. The young Astartes began to view himself not merely as an exceptional warrior, but as an artist whose medium was death itself. Under Fulgrim's guidance, the Emperor's children developed a culture of competitive excellence that pushed each warrior to exceed their previous achievements. For most Astartes, this created a healthy rivalry that improved overall Legion performance. For Lucius, it became an obsession that consumed every aspect of his existence. He could not simply be good, he had to be the best. Every training session became a quest for perfection, every combat engagement an opportunity to demonstrate his superiority over lesser warriors. The Legion's dueling traditions provided the perfect outlet for Lucius's competitive nature. These formal combats, conducted according to ancient protocols and observed by the entire Legion, became his stage. Here, before his Gene father and battle brothers, Lucius could display the full extent of his abilities. His victories in these contests were not mere triumphs, but works of art, each duel crafted to showcase different aspects of his skill. Opponents found themselves part of elaborate performances, their defeats choreographed to highlight Lucius's superiority in the most dramatic possible fashion. The psychological impact of these repeated victories began to reshape Lucius's personality in subtle but significant ways. Where once his arrogance had been tempered by the occasional setback or challenge, his consistent dominance eliminated any doubt about his abilities. He began to view defeat as impossible, not through overconfidence, but through a genuine belief that his skills had transcended normal limitations. This conviction was reinforced by the reactions of his peers, who increasingly regarded him with a mixture of admiration and fear. The perfectionism that had driven Lucius since childhood evolved into something more complex and potentially dangerous. He began to seek not merely victory, but perfect victory, defeats so complete and artistically executed that they became legendary within the Legion. This pursuit led him to develop increasingly elaborate fighting techniques, sword forms that prioritized aesthetic beauty over practical efficiency. His blade work became a form of performance art, with each movement calculated for maximum visual impact. The Great Crusade provided numerous opportunities for Lucius to test his abilities against the galaxy's finest warriors. Each new world brought fresh challenges, alien fighting styles, and warrior cultures that might have posed difficulties for lesser combatants. For Lucius, these encounters were merely opportunities to expand his repertoire, to absorb new techniques and incorporate them into his ever-evolving combat philosophy. His adaptability became legendary within the Legion, his ability to counter unfamiliar fighting styles earning him recognition as one of the Imperium's finest duelists. This period of constant warfare and victory began to shape Lucius's worldview in ways that would prove significant in later years. He came to see conflict not as a necessary evil, but as the purest expression of individual worth. Battle became his cathedral, the clash of blades his prayer, and victory his communion with forces greater than himself. The young Astartes began to develop a philosophy that elevated combat to a spiritual level, viewing each duel as a sacred ritual that revealed fundamental truths about the nature of existence. The Emperor's Children's growing reputation for martial excellence owed much to warriors like Lucius, whose individual achievements reflected glory upon the entire Legion. His name became synonymous with swordsmanship perfection, spoken in the same breath as the greatest blade masters in the Legion's history. This recognition fed his already considerable ego, reinforcing his belief that he represented the pinnacle of what an Astartes warrior could achieve. Yet even as Lucius basked in the adulation of his peers and the approval of his Primarch, subtle changes were taking place within his psyche. The constant pursuit of perfection, the relentless drive to exceed his previous achievements, was creating psychological pressures that would eventually demand release. His personality began to develop characteristics that, while initially seeming like natural extensions of his competitive nature, would later prove to be the foundation for far more dangerous transformations. The first whispers of corruption came not as dramatic revelations, but as subtle shifts in perspective, changes so gradual that even the most perceptive observers within the Third Legion failed to recognize their significance. The Emperor's Children had always pursued excellence with an intensity that bordered on obsession, but during the early decades of the Great Crusade, this drive began to evolve into something fundamentally different. Where once they had sought perfection as an expression of duty to the Emperor, they increasingly came to view it as an end unto itself, divorced from any higher purpose. Lucius found himself at the epicenter of this transformation. His natural inclination toward perfectionism made him particularly susceptible to the philosophical changes taking root within the Legion. The warrior who had once viewed his exceptional abilities as gifts to be used in service of humanity's expansion began to see them as proof of his inherent superiority over lesser beings. This shift was not sudden, but developed over years of constant warfare and uninterrupted victory, each triumph reinforcing his belief that normal rules and limitations simply did not apply to someone of his caliber. The Legion's encounters with alien civilizations during the Great Crusade exposed them to concepts and practices that challenged their preconceptions about combat and perfection. On worlds where warrior cultures had developed for millennia in isolation, the Emperor's Children discovered fighting techniques and philosophies that differed radically from imperial doctrine. While most Astartes viewed these alien practices with appropriate suspicion, Lucius and others like him began to see them as potential enhancements to their own abilities, regardless of their origin or implications. The world of Laren marked a crucial turning point in this gradual corruption. The Serpentine aliens who inhabited this verdant planet had developed a civilization built around the pursuit of sensation and experience, their entire culture dedicated to exploring every possible form of physical and emotional stimulation. Their warriors fought with a fluidity and grace that impressed even the perfectionist Emperor's Children, their combat techniques incorporating elements of dance and ritual that elevated violence to an art form. During the compliance action on Laren, Lucius encountered alien blade masters, whose fighting styles challenged his established techniques in ways he had never experienced. These Xenos warriors moved with an almost hypnotic quality, their serpentine forms allowing for attacks and defenses that seemed to defy conventional understanding of swordplay. More disturbing still was the evident pleasure they derived from combat, their alien features displaying expressions of ecstasy even as they faced death. The defeat of these alien champions should have been routine for a warrior of Lucius's caliber, but something about their approach to combat resonated with aspects of his personality that had previously remained dormant. He found himself studying their techniques with unusual intensity, not merely to counter them, but to understand the philosophy that underpinned their fluid, sensual approach to violence. The aliens seemed to view each exchange of blows not as a tactical necessity, but as an opportunity for transcendent experience. This exposure to alien combat philosophy coincided with broader changes occurring throughout the Emperor's children. Fulgrim himself had begun to display characteristics that, while initially appearing to be natural extensions of his pursuit of perfection, actually represented fundamental shifts in his priorities and values. The Primarch's growing fascination with artistic expression and sensory experience influenced the entire Legion, creating an environment where previously unthinkable concepts began to seem reasonable. The Maraviglia, a performance created by the Remembrancers attached to the Third Legion, served as a catalyst for these developing tendencies. The artistic work, which incorporated elements discovered on Laren, had a profound effect on those who witnessed it. Lucius, like many of his battle brothers, found himself deeply affected by the performance, though he struggled to articulate exactly what had changed within him. The experience left him with a hunger for sensation that his previous pursuits had never satisfied, a craving for experiences that transcended the merely physical. Following the Maraviglia, Lucius's approach to combat began to undergo subtle but significant changes. Where once he had sought perfect technique as an expression of martial discipline, he now began to pursue perfection for the sensations it provided. The moment of a perfectly executed strike, the precise instant when his blade found its mark, became sources of almost intoxicating pleasure. Victory was no longer simply about demonstrating superiority, but about experiencing the rush of sensation that came with absolute dominance over an opponent. These changes manifested most clearly during the Legion's dueling traditions. Lucius's performances in the practice cages became increasingly elaborate affairs, with the warrior extending combats far beyond what tactical necessity required. He began to savor each exchange, drawing out encounters to experience every nuance of sensation that combat could provide. His opponents, initially confused by this apparent inefficiency, gradually came to understand that they were no longer participants in martial contests, but unwilling partners in Lucius's pursuit of ever greater stimulation. The corruption spreading through the Third Legion was not limited to individual warriors, but began to affect the Legion's entire approach to warfare. Compliance actions that should have been swift and efficient became prolonged affairs, as the Emperor's children sought to extract maximum experience from each encounter. Battles were no longer fought simply to achieve victory, but to provide opportunities for the Legion's warriors to test themselves against worthy opponents and experience the full spectrum of combat sensations. Lucius found himself increasingly drawn to the most dangerous and challenging opponents on each battlefield. Where prudent tactics would have suggested overwhelming force or coordinated assault, he began to seek out single combat with enemy champions, regardless of the tactical implications. These encounters provided the intense, personal experiences that his corrupted psyche craved, moments of pure sensation where life and death balanced on the edge of a blade. The first signs of supernatural resilience began to manifest during this period, though their significance was not immediately apparent. Lucius survived wounds that should have proven fatal to even an enhanced Astartes, his recovery times defying medical understanding. Battle brothers who witnessed these incidents attributed them to exceptional conditioning or fortunate circumstances, failing to recognize the darker forces that were beginning to take interest in the supremely skilled swordsman. During a particularly brutal compliance action against a human civilization that had fallen to Xeno's influence, Lucius suffered what should have been a mortal wound. An enemy champion's blade pierced his primary heart and lodged deep in his ribcage, the weapon's alien composition resisting the Astartes' healing factor. Medical personnel prepared for the worst, but Lucius not only survived, but seemed to draw strength from the experience. The pain, rather than weakening him, appeared to provide a form of stimulation that enhanced his combat effectiveness. This incident marked the beginning of Lucius's unconscious pact with forces beyond mortal understanding. His pursuit of perfect sensation, combined with his exceptional skill, and growing disregard for conventional limitations had attracted the attention of entities that fed on such obsessions. The Prince of Pleasure, ancient beyond human comprehension and ever hungry for new sources of sensation, began to take a particular interest in the Emperor's children's swordsmen, whose appetites seemed to grow with each victory. The corruption manifesting within Lucius was not merely personal, but began to influence his relationships with his battle brothers. His growing arrogance, once tempered by genuine respect for worthy opponents, evolved into something approaching contempt for those he deemed inferior. Training sessions became opportunities for him to demonstrate his superiority in increasingly humiliating fashion, with fellow Astartes serving as unwilling participants in his pursuit of perfect dominance. This behavior created tensions within the Legion's command structure, as officers struggled to balance Lucius's undeniable effectiveness with his increasingly problematic attitude. His tactical contributions remained valuable, his combat prowess unquestionable, but his growing disdain for authority and conventional military discipline posed challenges that his superiors found difficult to address. The warrior who had once been a model of Astartes' excellence was becoming something altogether more dangerous and unpredictable. The early stages of the Horus Heresy provided new outlets for Lucius's evolving appetites. The civil war that tore apart the Imperium offered opportunities for combat against opponents who possessed skills and equipment comparable to his own. Loyalist Astartes, trained to the same standards and equipped with the finest weapons the Imperium could provide, presented challenges that alien foes had rarely matched. These encounters satisfied his craving for worthy opponents while providing the intense sensations that his corrupted psyche demanded. The betrayal at Istvan III saw Lucius fighting alongside his battle brothers against loyalist forces that included members of their own legion. The fratricidal nature of the conflict, which should have troubled any warrior with intact moral sensibilities, instead provided him with new forms of stimulation. The knowledge that he was fighting against former comrades, that each victory represented not merely personal triumph, but active betrayal of everything he had once sworn to protect, added layers of sensation that purely external conflicts had never provided. During the Drop Site Massacre, Lucius experienced combat on a scale that dwarfed anything from the Great Crusade. The concentrated presence of multiple legions, the intensity of the fighting, and the sheer scope of the betrayal created an environment saturated with the kind of extreme sensations that his transformed psyche craved. He moved through the battlefield like a predator among prey, seeking out the most skilled opponents and savoring each moment of perfect violence. The supernatural resilience that had first manifested during the compliance campaigns became more pronounced during these early heresy battles. Wounds that should have incapacitated him seemed to heal with unnatural speed, while injuries that would have slowed other Astartes appeared to invigorate him. Battle brothers began to notice that Lucius seemed to draw strength from pain and damage, his combat effectiveness actually increasing as he sustained wounds that should have degraded his performance. These changes were accompanied by physical transformations that, while subtle at first, gradually became more pronounced. His features began to acquire a predatory sharpness that had not been present during his time as a loyalist, while his movements took on an almost serpentine quality that echoed the alien warriors he had faced on Laren. Most disturbing of all were his eyes, which began to display a light that seemed to come from within, a glow that suggested the presence of forces beyond mortal understanding. The corruption that had begun as a pursuit of perfection was evolving into something far more dangerous and comprehensive. Lucius was no longer simply a warrior who had fallen to pride and arrogance, but was becoming a conduit for powers that existed beyond the material realm. His exceptional skill and insatiable appetite for sensation had made him an ideal vessel for entities that sought to influence the physical universe through mortal agents. The battles of the early heresy period saw Lucius's tactical role within the Third Legion evolve to match his changing nature. He was increasingly deployed as a champion and duelist, sent to face enemy heroes in single combat, while his battle brothers engaged in broader tactical operations. These assignments suited his corrupted preferences perfectly, providing opportunities for the kind of intense, personal combat experiences that satisfied his growing hunger for sensation. Each victory in these duels added to Lucius's reputation and reinforced his belief in his own superiority, but they also deepened his corruption and strengthened his unconscious connection to the Dark Prince. The warrior who had once fought for the glory of the Emperor and the advancement of humanity was becoming something altogether different, a creature driven by appetites that grew stronger with each indulgence and more demanding with each satisfaction. The betrayal at Istvan III had been merely the prelude to a far greater act of treachery, one that would shatter the Imperium's unity forever and provide Lucius with opportunities for sensation that exceeded even his corrupted imagination. When the War Master's forces withdrew to the nearby fifth planet of the Istvan system, they carried with them the survivors of the virus bombing, including Lucius, whose supernatural resilience had seen him through horrors that claimed countless other Astartes. The retreat was not a defeat but a tactical repositioning, preparing for the arrival of loyalist forces that would soon discover the true scope of Horus's rebellion. The black sands of Istvan V stretched endlessly beneath a sky choked with industrial pollutants and the smoke of massive defensive preparations. Massive earthworks and fortified positions scarred the landscape, creating killing fields designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined zones of destruction. The traitor legions had spent weeks preparing these defenses, but for warriors like Lucius, the fortifications were merely staging areas for the real purpose of their presence: the systematic destruction of loyalist forces and the sensations that such wholesale slaughter would provide. Lucius found himself assigned to the forward positions, where the initial loyalist assault would strike with maximum force. The Emperor's children had been given responsibility for a section of the defensive line that commanded excellent fields of fire across the primary landing zones, positions that would place them in direct contact with the first wave of loyalist drop pods. For most Astartes, such an assignment would have been a matter of tactical necessity, but for the increasingly corrupted swordsmen, it represented an opportunity to experience combat against the finest warriors the Imperium could deploy. The arrival of the loyalist forces created a spectacle that impressed even veterans of the Great Crusade's largest battles. Drop pods fell like meteoric rain across the Urgal Depression, their retro thrusters carving bright lines through the polluted atmosphere as they delivered their deadly cargo to the surface. The Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands had committed their full strength to what they believed would be a decisive strike against the rebellion, their combined might representing one of the largest concentrations of Astartes' power ever assembled. From his position in the defensive line, Lucius watched the deployment with the anticipation of a connoisseur, observing the preparation of an exquisite meal. The precision of the loyalist assault, the coordination between different legion elements, and the obvious skill of the warriors emerging from their drop pods promised encounters that would satisfy even his elevated standards. These were not the desperate survivors of Istvan III or alien champions with exotic but ultimately inferior techniques, but Astartes trained to the same standards he had once embraced, equipped with weapons and armor that matched his own. The initial exchanges of fire across the depression created a cacophony that resonated through Lucius's enhanced senses with almost musical quality. Bolter rounds traced luminous paths through the smoky air, their distinctive bark mixing with the sharper crack of plasma weapons and the bass rumble of heavy ordnance. The sounds of battle had always provided him with a form of stimulation, but the scale and intensity of the fighting at Istvan V elevated these sensations to levels he had never before experienced. The first loyalist forces to reach the Emperor's children positions were advance elements of the Raven Guard, their black armor making them difficult targets as they moved through the industrial debris that littered the battlefield. These warriors employed stealth and precision in their assault, seeking to infiltrate the defensive line and create breaches for the heavier forces following behind them. Their approach represented exactly the kind of skilled opposition that Lucius's corrupted psyche craved, opponents whose abilities would test his own, while providing the intense sensations that had become his primary motivation. When the first Raven Guard infiltrator attempted to breach the section of line under Lucius's supervision, The encounter unfolded with a deadly ballet of movement and counter-movement that satisfied the Emperor's children warriors' hunger for perfect violence. The loyalist Astartes moved with the fluid grace characteristic of his legion, his chainsword carving precise arcs through the air as he sought to eliminate the traitor defenders. Lucius met this assault with techniques that had been refined through years of corruption and countless victories, his blade work displaying an artistry that transformed the exchange into something approaching performance. The duel lasted longer than tactical necessity required, with Lucius deliberately extending the encounter to savor every nuance of sensation it provided. The Raven Guard warrior's obvious skill made him a worthy partner in this dance of death, his defensive techniques forcing the Emperor's children champion to employ increasingly elaborate attacks. Each exchange of blows generated waves of pleasure that coursed through Lucius's nervous system, the perfect balance between life and death creating the kind of intense experience that his transformed nature demanded. The Loyalist's death came not as a culmination of overwhelming force, but as the final note in a symphony of violence that Lucius had orchestrated from the encounter's beginning. The fatal strike, delivered with surgical precision through a gap in the Raven Guard warrior's armor, provided a moment of transcendent sensation that left the Emperor's children champion momentarily stunned by its intensity. The dying Loyalist's expression of surprise and pain added layers of stimulation that purely physical combat could never have provided. Similar encounters occurred throughout the defensive line as the Loyalist assault gained momentum, but none matched the intensity of personal combat that Lucius experienced in his individual duels. The broader battle, while impressive in its scale and ferocity, lacked the intimate quality that single combat provided. The sensation of blade meeting blade, the precise timing required for perfect strikes, and the personal nature of killing an opponent at close quarters created experiences that mass warfare could never duplicate. The arrival of Ferrus Manus and the main body of the Iron Hands transformed the character of the battle, introducing heavy armor and concentrated firepower that threatened to overwhelm the traitor positions through sheer weight of assault. The Iron Hands advanced with mechanical precision, their black armor and augmetic enhancements giving them an almost inhuman appearance as they methodically cleared defensive positions. Their approach to warfare, emphasizing efficiency and overwhelming force over individual heroics, represented a different kind of challenge than the stealth tactics of the Raven Guard. Lucius found himself facing Iron Hands warriors whose combat doctrine emphasized coordinated assault over individual prowess, creating encounters that tested different aspects of his abilities. These loyalists fought with disciplined fury, their augmetic enhancements providing capabilities that pure flesh could not match. The challenge of defeating opponents who combined Astartes' training with mechanical augmentation added new dimensions to the sensations that combat provided, forcing him to adapt his techniques to counter abilities that differed significantly from those of unenhanced warriors. The mechanical precision of the Iron Hands created a different aesthetic of violence than Lucius had previously encountered. Where his duels with Raven Guard infiltrators had possessed an almost artistic quality, his battles against Iron Hands warriors became exercises in overcoming systematic opposition. The Loyalists' augmetic limbs moved with inhuman speed and precision, their enhanced strength allowing them to wield weapons that would have been unwieldy for purely biological warriors. Defeating such opponents required techniques that incorporated elements of anti-mechanical warfare, approaches that Lucius developed through experimentation during the heat of battle. One particular encounter with an Iron Hands sergeant illustrated the unique challenges these opponents presented. The Loyalist warrior's left arm had been replaced with an augmetic limb that terminated in a power fist, while his right eye had been substituted with a targeting device that provided enhanced accuracy with ranged weapons. The combination of mechanical enhancement and Astartes' training created an opponent whose capabilities differed significantly from anything Lucius had previously faced. The duel began with the Iron Hands sergeant attempting to use his augmetic arm's superior strength to overwhelm Lucius through brute force, the power fist's energy field crackling as it carved through the air with mechanical precision. Lucius responded with techniques that emphasized speed and agility over direct confrontation, his blade work focusing on attacks against the joints and connection points where flesh met machine. The encounter became a study in adaptation, with each warrior adjusting their approach based on the other's capabilities and limitations. The Iron Hands warriors' augmetic enhancements provided advantages in strength and durability, but they also created vulnerabilities that a sufficiently skilled opponent could exploit. Lucius discovered that the mechanical components, while superior to flesh in many respects, lacked the adaptability and intuitive responses that biological systems provided. His strikes began to target these weaknesses, seeking to disrupt the delicate interfaces between organic and mechanical components. The sergeant's defeat came through a combination of superior technique and tactical awareness that highlighted the limitations of mechanical enhancement when faced with truly exceptional skill. Lucius's final strike severed the neural connections controlling the Loyalist's augmetic arm, leaving the powerful limb useless, while the Emperor's children champion delivered the killing blow with almost casual precision. The victory provided sensations that differed qualitatively from his encounters with purely biological opponents, the successful defeat of enhanced capabilities adding new layers to his growing catalog of combat experiences. The systematic destruction of Iron Hand's positions throughout the Depression created opportunities for encounters with increasingly senior Loyalist officers, warriors whose individual abilities matched or exceeded those of their subordinates. Company captains and veteran sergeants found themselves isolated as their units were destroyed around them, creating situations where personal combat became the only remaining option. These encounters satisfied Lucius's appetite for worthy opponents while demonstrating the growing extent of his corruption. The battle's progression toward the climactic betrayal by the second wave created an atmosphere of anticipation that resonated through Lucius's enhanced senses with almost physical intensity. The knowledge that the Loyalist forces were advancing toward a trap that would destroy them completely added psychological dimensions to the combat that purely tactical considerations could never have provided. Each Loyalist warrior he faced was not merely an opponent to be defeated, but a participant in a larger drama of betrayal and destruction. When the second wave of supposedly Loyalist forces revealed their true allegiance, the character of the battle transformed completely. The Word-bearers, Alpha Legion, Night Lords, and Iron Warriors opened fire on their erstwhile allies, creating a killing field that trapped the Loyalist forces between two hostile armies. The systematic nature of this betrayal, the careful coordination required to execute such a complex deception, and the sheer scale of the destruction that followed created an environment saturated with the kind of sensations that Lucius's corrupted nature craved. The massacre that followed provided opportunities for combat that exceeded even Lucius's elevated expectations. Loyalist forces, caught between the hammer of the first wave and the anvil of the second, fought with the desperation of warriors who understood that no quarter would be given. Their resistance, while ultimately futile, displayed the kind of skill and determination that made each encounter a worthy test of abilities. The knowledge that these opponents faced certain death added intensity to every exchange, creating moments of perfect violence that satisfied even Lucius's demanding standards. Throughout the slaughter, Lucius moved like a predator among prey, seeking out the most skilled opponents and savoring each moment of perfect combat. His blade work had evolved beyond mere technique into something approaching artistry, each strike calculated for maximum effect both tactically and aesthetically. The dying Loyalists provided him with sensations that ranged from the purely physical pleasure of perfect swordplay to the psychological satisfaction of demonstrating absolute superiority over worthy opponents. The supernatural resilience that had first manifested during the compliance campaigns became increasingly pronounced during the massacre. Wounds that should have slowed or incapacitated him seemed to provide additional stimulation, his combat effectiveness actually increasing as he sustained damage. Battle brothers fighting alongside him began to notice that Lucius appeared to draw strength from injury, his movements becoming more fluid and precise as Loyalist weapons found their mark. The years following Istvan V had transformed Lucius into something that barely resembled the proud Astartes, who had once served the emperor with unwavering loyalty. The corruption that had begun as a pursuit of perfection had metastasized into an all-consuming hunger for sensation that drove him to seek ever more extreme forms of combat and stimulation. His body bore the marks of countless battles, each scar a testament to encounters that should have proven fatal, but had instead served to strengthen his supernatural resilience. The Prince of Pleasure's influence had grown with each victory, each moment of perfect violence feeding the dark compact that bound the swordsman to forces beyond mortal comprehension. When Horus's forces finally reached the Sol system, Lucius found himself positioned among the most elite warriors of the traitor legions, his reputation as an unstoppable duelist having spread throughout the War Master's armies. The Emperor's children had been assigned crucial roles in the assault on humanity's birthworld, their expertise in close combat and urban warfare making them ideal for the brutal fighting that would characterize the siege. The prospect of facing the Imperial Palace's defenders, warriors trained to the highest standards and equipped with the finest weapons the Imperium could provide, filled Lucius with anticipation that bordered on ecstasy. The approach to Terra revealed a world transformed by 7 years of frantic preparation. Massive orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons capable of destroying capital ships, while the planet's surface had been converted into a fortress of unprecedented scale. The Imperial Palace itself had been expanded and reinforced until it covered nearly half of the planet's primary continent, its walls rising kilometers into the atmosphere and its defenses incorporating technologies that dated back to the Dark Age of technology. The sight of these preparations should have given any rational warrior pause, but for Lucius, they merely promised encounters with opponents worthy of his evolved abilities. The initial bombardment of Terra's defenses created a spectacle that satisfied even Lucius's demanding aesthetic sensibilities. Macro batteries and nova cannons carved luminous paths through the void as traitor and loyalist fleets exchanged fire on a scale that dwarfed even the largest engagements of the Great Crusade. The destruction of orbital platforms sent cascades of debris raining down upon the planet's surface, while the detonation of void shields created aurora-like displays that painted the sky in unnatural colors. The sheer scale of the violence, the careful orchestration required to coordinate such massive forces, and the knowledge that this represented the climactic battle for humanity's future added layers of sensation that purely tactical considerations could never have provided. When the traitor forces finally made planetfall, Lucius found himself assigned to spearhead assaults against some of the palace's most heavily defended sections. The Emperor's children had been tasked with breaching the Eternity Wall, a fortification that stretched for hundreds of kilometers and incorporated defensive systems that had been refined over millennia. The wall's defenders included not only Imperial fists and their successor chapters, but also elements from every loyal legion that had managed to reach Terra in time for the siege. The first assaults against the Eternity Wall provided Lucius with opponents whose skills matched or exceeded those he had faced during the heresy's earlier campaigns. Imperial Fist's veterans, their yellow armor scarred by years of siege warfare, fought with a disciplined fury that reflected their legion's expertise in defensive operations. These warriors had spent decades perfecting techniques for close-quarters combat in confined spaces, their bolt pistols and chainswords wielded with precision that came from countless hours of training in similar environments. The narrow confines of the wall's defensive positions created an environment where individual skill could prove decisive, exactly the kind of intimate combat that Lucius's corrupted nature craved. Breaching charges opened gaps in the massive fortification, creating entry points that could only be exploited through direct assault by small groups of elite warriors. The Emperor's Children champion found himself leading these attacks, his supernatural abilities and growing reputation making him the obvious choice for such dangerous assignments. One of his first encounters within the wall's defenses illustrated the quality of opposition that Terra's defenders could provide. An Imperial Fist sergeant, his armor bearing the scars of numerous engagements, met Lucius's assault with techniques that demonstrated decades of experience in defensive warfare. The Loyalist's chainsword moved with mechanical precision, each strike calculated to maximize damage while conserving energy for prolonged combat. His bolt pistol provided covering fire that forced Lucius to approach through carefully planned routes, the explosive rounds cratering the ancient stone of the wall's interior passages. The duel that followed showcased the evolution of Lucius's abilities since the early days of the heresy. Where once he had relied primarily on superior technique and natural talent, his combat style now incorporated elements that defied conventional understanding. His movements possessed an almost serpentine quality that allowed him to flow around the Imperial Fist Sergeant's attacks, while his blade work displayed an artistry that transformed violence into something approaching performance. The encounter lasted far longer than tactical necessity required, with Lucius deliberately extending the combat to savor every nuance of sensation it provided. The Imperial Fist's warrior's death came through a combination of superior skill and supernatural enhancement that highlighted the extent of Lucius's transformation. The fatal strike, delivered with surgical precision through a gap in the Loyalist's armor, provided a moment of transcendent pleasure that left the Emperor's children champion momentarily stunned by its intensity. The dying sergeant's expression of defiance, maintained even in the face of certain death, added psychological dimensions to the victory that purely physical triumph could never have achieved. Similar encounters occurred throughout the assault on the Eternity Wall, as Lucius carved a path of destruction through the Imperial Fist's defensive positions. Each breach in the fortification revealed new chambers and passages filled with Loyalist defenders, creating opportunities for the kind of intimate combat that satisfied his appetite for worthy opponents. The ancient stonework of the wall, carved with inscriptions commemorating 10,000 years of Imperial history, provided a backdrop for violence that possessed almost ritualistic significance. The systematic destruction of defensive positions throughout the wall created opportunities for encounters with increasingly senior Loyalist officers. Company captains and veteran sergeants, their individual abilities honed by decades of warfare, found themselves facing an opponent whose skills had been enhanced by forces beyond their understanding. These warriors fought with the desperate courage of men who understood that their defeat would bring the traitor forces one step closer to the Emperor himself, their resistance displaying the kind of determination that made each victory a genuine achievement. During one particularly intense engagement deep within the wall's interior, Lucius encountered a group of Imperial Fist's veterans who had barricaded themselves in a weapons cache, determined to deny the Emperor's children access to the advanced armament stored within. The Loyalists had positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that would make any direct assault extremely costly, their bolt rifles and plasma guns providing firepower that could threaten even enhanced Astartes. The tactical situation required careful planning and coordination, but Lucius's growing arrogance led him to attempt a direct assault that should have resulted in his destruction. The supernatural resilience that had first manifested during the compliance campaigns proved decisive in this encounter. Bolt rounds that should have shattered his armor seemed to cause only superficial damage, while plasma bursts that would have vaporized normal Astartes left him wounded but functional. The Imperial Fist's veterans watched in horror as their concentrated fire failed to stop the advancing Emperor's children champion, their expressions of disbelief providing Lucius with psychological satisfaction that complemented the physical pleasure of surviving wounds that should have proven fatal. The slaughter that followed demonstrated the growing extent of Lucius's corruption. The Imperial Fist's veterans, trapped in their defensive position and faced with an apparently invulnerable opponent, fought with the desperation of warriors who understood that no quarter would be given. Their resistance, while ultimately futile, displayed the kind of skill and determination that made each kill a worthy addition to Lucius's growing catalog of victories. The knowledge that these opponents faced certain death at the hands of a traitor to everything they had sworn to protect added intensity to every exchange. As the assault on the Eternity Wall progressed, Lucius's reputation as an unstoppable duelist spread throughout both traitor and loyalist forces. Imperial Fist's officers began to speak of the Emperor's children champion in hushed tones, describing encounters with a warrior whose abilities seemed to transcend normal limitations. These accounts, while dismissed by some as battlefield exaggeration, accurately reflected the supernatural nature of Lucius's growing power and the extent of his transformation from loyal Astartes to something altogether more dangerous. The breach of the Eternity Wall opened the way for traitor forces to advance deeper into the Imperial Palace complex, bringing them into contact with defenders whose quality exceeded even the Imperial Fist's veterans they had previously faced. Custodian Guard units, their golden armor gleaming despite the grime of prolonged warfare, moved through the palace's corridors with a precision and coordination that reflected millennia of training in its defense. These warriors represented the pinnacle of human enhancement, their abilities surpassing even those of Astartes through techniques and technologies that dated back to the Emperor's earliest experiments in creating superhuman soldiers. Lucius's first encounter with a custodian guard demonstrated the qualitative difference between these elite warriors and the opponents he had previously faced. The golden-armored guardian moved with fluid grace that made even enhanced Astartes seem clumsy by comparison, his guardian's spear carving precise arcs through the air as he sought to eliminate the intruding Emperor's children champion. The weapon itself was a masterwork of the artificer's art, its power field crackling with energies that could cleave through the finest armor with contemptuous ease. The duel that followed tested Lucius's abilities in ways that no previous encounter had managed. The custodian's techniques incorporated elements of combat doctrine that had been refined over 10 millennia, approaches to warfare that took into account capabilities and limitations that normal human warriors could never achieve. His guardian's spear provided both ranged and close combat capabilities, the weapon's integrated bolter delivering explosive rounds with surgical precision, while its powered blade threatened to end any exchange with a single successful strike. The encounter lasted longer than any previous duel Lucius had fought, the custodian's abilities forcing him to employ techniques and strategies that pushed his corrupted capabilities to their limits. The Golden Warrior's armor provided protection that surpassed even Terminator plate, while his enhanced reflexes and coordination made him a target that was almost impossible to hit with conventional attacks. The challenge of facing such an opponent provided sensations that exceeded even Lucius's elevated expectations, the perfect balance between skill and supernatural enhancement, creating moments of transcendent combat that satisfied his most demanding appetites. The custodian's eventual defeat came not through overwhelming force or superior technique, but through the gradual accumulation of minor advantages that Lucius's supernatural resilience allowed him to exploit. Wounds that should have slowed the Emperor's children champion seemed to provide additional stimulation, his combat effectiveness actually increasing as the Golden Warrior's spear found its mark. The dying custodian's expression of disbelief, as he witnessed an opponent survive injuries that should have proven instantly fatal, provided psychological satisfaction that complemented the physical pleasure of victory against such a worthy foe. The systematic destruction of custodian positions throughout the inner palace created opportunities for encounters with warriors whose individual abilities represented the pinnacle of human achievement. Tribune commanders and shield captain veterans found themselves facing an opponent whose skills had been enhanced by forces that their training had never prepared them to counter. These engagements satisfied Lucius's appetite for worthy opponents while demonstrating the growing extent of his supernatural abilities and the dark compact that sustained them. During the final stages of the assault on the Imperial Palace, as traitor forces fought their way toward the Sanctum Imperialis itself, Lucius encountered opposition that would test his abilities in ways he had never imagined. The innermost defenses of the palace were manned not only by custodians and space marines, but by warriors from across the galaxy who had come to Terra to stand in humanity's darkest hour. These defenders included champions from night houses whose loyalty to the Emperor transcended political considerations, as well as elite guard regiments whose skills had been honed through centuries of warfare against the galaxy's most dangerous threats. It was during this climactic phase of the siege that Lucius finally encountered an opponent whose abilities would challenge his growing belief in his own invincibility. Nikona Sharokin of the Raven Guard had survived the massacre at Istvan V through a combination of exceptional skill and careful planning, his hatred for the traitor legions driving him to seek opportunities for revenge against those who had betrayed their oaths. The Raven Guard warrior had spent years hunting Emperor's children champions, his techniques refined specifically for combat against opponents whose abilities exceeded normal Astartes' limitations. The encounter began in the ruins of a palace chapel, its ancient stonework scarred by bombardment and its sacred imagery defaced by traitor forces. Sharokin had positioned himself to take advantage of the terrain, using the chapel's broken columns and collapsed sections to create firing positions that would allow him to engage at range before closing for melee combat. His approach demonstrated the tactical acumen that had allowed him to survive when so many of his battle brothers had fallen, careful planning, replacing the reckless heroics that had doomed lesser warriors. The initial exchange of fire revealed the qualitative difference between this opponent and those Lucius had previously faced. Sharokin's shots were placed with surgical precision, each bolt round targeted at joints and weak points in the Emperor's children champion's armor. The Raven Guard warrior's rifle had been modified with targeting systems that provided enhanced accuracy, while his ammunition included specialized rounds designed to penetrate even the finest power armor. The careful preparation evident in these modifications demonstrated a level of planning and forethought that exceeded anything Lucius had encountered during his previous duels. When the engagement finally moved to close combat, Sharokin's techniques proved to be perfectly adapted for fighting against opponents whose abilities had been enhanced beyond normal Astartes' limitations. His blade work emphasized speed and precision over raw power, seeking to exploit the gaps that supernatural resilience could not cover. The Raven Guard warrior had studied recordings of Lucius's previous encounters, analyzing his techniques and identifying patterns that could be exploited by a sufficiently skilled opponent. The duel that followed represented the culmination of years of corruption and the ultimate test of abilities that Lucius had believed made him invincible. Sharokin's attacks came with mechanical precision, each strike calculated to maximize damage while minimizing exposure to counterattack. His defensive techniques incorporated elements specifically designed to counter the flowing, serpentine combat style that the Emperor's children champion had developed, creating exchanges that tested both warriors' abilities to their absolute limits. For the first time since his transformation had begun, Lucius found himself genuinely challenged by an opponent whose skills matched his own. The sensations provided by this encounter exceeded even his most demanding expectations, the perfect balance between evenly matched abilities, creating moments of transcendent combat that satisfied appetites he had not known he possessed. The knowledge that defeat was actually possible added psychological dimensions to the duel that no previous encounter had provided. The fatal strike came with surgical precision, Sharokin's blade finding the one gap in Lucius's defenses that supernatural resilience could not protect. The Emperor's children champion felt the weapon pierce his primary heart and lodge deep in his chest cavity, the alien composition of the Raven Guard warrior's sword disrupting the dark energies that had sustained him through countless previous encounters. For the first time in years, Lucius experienced the genuine possibility of death, the sensation providing a form of ultimate stimulation that his corrupted psyche had never imagined possible. As consciousness faded and his enhanced physiology began to shut down, Lucius felt something stirring in the depths of his being, a presence that had been growing stronger with each victory and each moment of perfect sensation. The Prince of Pleasure, whose interest in the exceptional swordsman had been building for years, finally claimed the prize that had been promised through their unconscious compact. Death, rather than ending Lucius's existence, became the catalyst for a transformation that would elevate him beyond the limitations of mortal flesh and make him truly eternal. The resurrection that followed Sharokin's killing blow marked the moment when Lucius's unconscious compact with the Prince of Pleasure became fully manifest. What had begun as subtle enhancements to his natural abilities and an unnatural resilience to injury transformed into something far more profound and terrifying. The dark energies that coursed through his reforming body carried with them the weight of an ancient curse, one that would bind him to eternal service while granting him a form of immortality that transcended the normal boundaries between life and death. The mechanism of Lucius's return defied conventional understanding of biology and physics. His body, which had suffered wounds that should have proven instantly fatal to even an enhanced Astartes, began to regenerate at a rate that suggested intervention by forces operating beyond the material realm. Torn organs reformed themselves with supernatural speed, while severed neural pathways reconnected in patterns that improved rather than merely restored their previous function. The ceramite plates of his power armor, cracked and punctured by Sharokin's blade, flowed like liquid as they sealed the breaches and incorporated new elements that had not been present in their original configuration. The most disturbing aspect of this resurrection was not the miraculous nature of Lucius's recovery, but what happened to the Raven Guard warrior who had delivered the killing blow. Sharokin's features began to manifest on the surface of the Emperor's Children Champion's armor, the Loyalist's face emerging from the ceramite plates as if the material itself had become a canvas for some cosmic artist. The expression captured in this supernatural portrait reflected the exact moment of the Raven Guard warrior's triumph, his satisfaction at finally achieving revenge against one of the traitors who had betrayed their oaths at Istvan V. This manifestation represented the first clear demonstration of the curse that Slaanesh had woven into Lucius's very existence. The Prince of Pleasure, whose dominion extended over all forms of sensation and experience, had crafted a fate for the exceptional swordsman that would ensure his eternal service, while providing the Dark God with a constant source of the emotions and experiences that sustained such entities. The curse operated through principles that existed beyond mortal comprehension, drawing upon the fundamental connections between consciousness, identity, and the immaterial realm that underlies all reality. The theological implications of Lucius's resurrection ability within the broader context of chaos lore represented a significant departure from the normal relationship between mortal servants and their divine patrons. Where most champions of the dark gods served through choice or corruption, gradually surrendering their humanity in exchange for power and favor, Lucius had become something more akin to a living avatar of Slaanesh's will. His existence served multiple purposes within the Prince of Pleasure's cosmic designs, providing both a weapon for use in the material realm and a conduit through which the Dark God could experience sensations that would otherwise remain beyond its reach. The curse's operation depended upon a specific psychological trigger that reflected Slaanesh's deep understanding of mortal nature. The mechanism required not merely that someone kill Lucius, but that they derive satisfaction or pride from the act of doing so. This seemingly simple condition contained layers of complexity that made the curse nearly impossible to circumvent through conventional means. Any warrior skilled enough to defeat Lucius in combat would naturally feel some degree of satisfaction at overcoming such a formidable opponent, while the very act of taking pride in one's martial abilities created the psychological opening that allowed the curse to take effect. The process by which a killer became Lucius's new host body operated through principles that existed at the intersection of psychology, biology, and the immaterial forces that govern the warp. The moment of pride or satisfaction created a sympathetic connection between the killer's consciousness and the supernatural energies that sustained Lucius's existence. This connection, once established, began to work changes in the killer's physical form that gradually transformed them into a new vessel for the cursed champion's continued existence. The transformation typically began with subtle alterations to the killer's appearance, changes so minor that they might initially be dismissed as tricks of light or observer error. Facial features would begin to shift almost imperceptibly, taking on characteristics that belonged to Lucius rather than the original individual. These changes accelerated over time, with the killer's body gradually reshaping itself to match the cursed champion's physical form, while their consciousness was slowly subsumed by the overwhelming presence of Lucius's supernatural essence. The psychological aspects of this transformation proved even more disturbing than the physical changes. The killer would begin to experience memories and sensations that belonged to Lucius rather than themselves, their own personality gradually eroded by the influx of experiences spanning centuries of warfare and corruption. The process was not instantaneous, but unfolded over days or weeks, allowing the victim to witness their own identity being systematically destroyed and replaced by something alien and malevolent. Throughout galactic history, numerous individuals had fallen victim to this curse, their victories over Lucius transformed into instruments of their own destruction. The diversity of these victims reflected the wide range of opponents who had managed to overcome the cursed champion through skill, luck, or circumstance. Imperial Guard officers, Space Marine captains, alien warlords, and even other Chaos champions had all experienced the bitter irony of discovering that their greatest triumph had become the means of their ultimate defeat. One of the earliest documented cases involved a Salamander's sergeant named Thaddeus Kryn, who encountered Lucius during a boarding action in the years following the Siege of Terra. The Loyalist warrior had managed to corner the Emperor's children champion in a ship's armory, using the confined space to negate Lucius's superior mobility and technique. Kryn's thunder hammer, wielded with the methodical precision characteristic of his legion, had delivered a blow that should have reduced even an enhanced Astartes to pulverized remains. The Salamander's sergeant's satisfaction at eliminating a notorious traitor proved to be his undoing. Within hours of the encounter, Kryn began to experience changes that defied medical explanation. His features, previously bearing the distinctive characteristics of Nocturne's harsh environment, began to take on the predatory sharpness that marked Lucius's appearance. The sergeant's memories of his homeworld and battle brothers gradually faded, replaced by recollections of battles fought in service to the Prince of Pleasure. Within a week, nothing remained of Thaddeus Kryn except another face adorning Lucius's armor, while the cursed champion continued his eternal existence in a new body. A similar fate befell Captain Arcturus Vane of the Iron Hands, whose encounter with Lucius occurred during a raid on a forge world in the 32nd Millennium. The Iron Hands officer had spent months planning the assault, analyzing intelligence reports and tactical assessments to develop strategies specifically designed to counter Lucius's known capabilities. His approach emphasized overwhelming firepower and coordinated assault, seeking to eliminate the cursed champion through methods that would minimize the risk of single combat. Vane's plan succeeded beyond his expectations, with concentrated fire from multiple heavy weapons reducing Lucius to component atoms in a matter of seconds. The Iron Hands captain's pride in his tactical acumen and his satisfaction at eliminating a significant threat to Imperial forces created the psychological opening that the curse required. The transformation that followed proved particularly disturbing because of Vane's extensive cybernetic augmentations, which the curse somehow incorporated into Lucius's new form while maintaining their functionality. The case of Wabos Scarjo demonstrated that the curse operated without regard for species or psychological framework. The massive orc warlord had encountered Lucius during a three-way battle on a contested world, their duel taking place amid the chaos of Imperial, Chaos, and Orc forces engaged in simultaneous combat. Scarjaw's victory came through brute force rather than technique, his power claw literally tearing Lucius apart in a display of raw violence that impressed even other orcs. The orc's simple satisfaction at proving himself the better fighter triggered the curse's mechanism, despite the fundamental differences between human and orc psychology. The transformation that followed created one of the most bizarre manifestations of Lucius's resurrection, with the cursed champion's consciousness somehow adapting to function within an orc's radically different neural architecture. The resulting hybrid retained Lucius's memories and personality, while incorporating aspects of orc physiology that enhanced his already formidable combat capabilities. Perhaps the most tragic case involved Sister Superior Miriam of the Order of the Sacred Rose, whose encounter with Lucius occurred during the defense of a shrine world in the 35th millennium. The Sororitas officer had managed to wound the cursed champion with a blessed blade, the weapon's sanctified nature disrupting the supernatural energies that sustained his existence. Her prayer of thanksgiving for the Emperor's guidance in achieving victory provided the emotional trigger that the curse required, transforming her moment of spiritual triumph into the catalyst for her own destruction. The curse's ability to affect individuals whose faith should have provided protection against chaos influence highlighted the sophisticated nature of Slaanesh's creation. The Dark Prince had crafted a mechanism that could exploit even the most positive emotions, turning devotion and righteousness into instruments of corruption. Sister Miriam's transformation proved particularly disturbing to imperial authorities, as it suggested that no amount of faith or purity could provide absolute protection against certain forms of chaos influence. The theological implications of these transformations extended far beyond their immediate tactical significance. Each resurrection demonstrated Slaanesh's ability to reach across the boundaries between the material and immaterial realms, manipulating the fundamental forces that governed life and death according to the Dark God's will. The curse represented a form of divine intervention that operated through principles entirely alien to imperial understanding of how the universe functioned. Imperial scholars who studied reports of Lucius's resurrections found themselves confronting evidence that challenged basic assumptions about the nature of consciousness and identity. The complete transformation of individuals into perfect replicas of the cursed champion suggested that personal identity was far more malleable than previously believed, while the retention of Lucius's memories across multiple bodies implied forms of consciousness transfer that exceeded even the most advanced imperial technology. The metaphysical aspects of the curse also raised disturbing questions about the nature of death itself within the context of chaos influence. Lucius's resurrections demonstrated that death, traditionally viewed as the ultimate boundary of mortal existence, could be circumvented through supernatural means. This revelation had profound implications for imperial doctrine, which held that death represented the soul's final judgment and transition to whatever fate the Emperor decreed. The curse's operation through pride and satisfaction revealed Slaanesh's deep understanding of mortal psychology and the fundamental drives that motivated conscious beings. The Prince of Pleasure had identified the precise emotional trigger that would ensure the curse's continued operation, while providing a constant source of the experiences that sustained such entities. Each resurrection fed Slaanesh's appetite for sensation, while demonstrating the Dark God's power to corrupt even the most positive emotions. The diversity of Lucius's victims throughout galactic history illustrated the curse's universal applicability across species and psychological frameworks. Human, Astartes, alien, and even other chaos champions had all fallen victim to the mechanism, their victories transformed into instruments of their own destruction. This broad effectiveness suggested that the curse operated through principles that transcended the specific characteristics of individual species or belief systems. The faces that adorned Lucius's armor served as a permanent reminder of the curse's operation and the price of defeating him in combat. Each visage captured the exact moment of its owner's triumph, preserving their satisfaction and pride for eternity while serving as a warning to future opponents. The psychological impact of these manifestations proved almost as effective as Lucius's combat abilities, with many potential adversaries hesitating when confronted with evidence of the curse's reality. The curse's ability to incorporate technological augmentations and alien physiologies into Lucius's successive forms demonstrated its adaptive nature and the sophisticated understanding of biological and mechanical systems that its creator possessed. Each new body brought with it capabilities and characteristics that enhanced the cursed champion's overall effectiveness, creating a form of evolutionary pressure that gradually improved his combat potential over time. The aftermath of the Siege of Terra left the Emperor's children legions scattered across the galaxy like fragments of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a distorted image of what they had once been. The legion's cohesion, already strained by their increasing devotion to sensation and excess, completely collapsed in the wake of Fulgrim's ascension to demonhood and the retreat of the traitor forces into the Eye of Terror. Where once the Third Legion had operated as a unified force capable of coordinating massive campaigns, they now existed as countless warbands pursuing their own twisted agendas across the galaxy's war-torn expanse. Lucius found himself uniquely positioned to exploit this fragmentation. His reputation as an undefeatable duelist had survived the Legion's collapse, while his supernatural resilience and the curse that bound him to eternal service made him an invaluable asset to any warband seeking to establish dominance over their rivals. The Cursed Champion's ability to return from death provided a form of continuity that few other Emperor's Children leaders could match, while his combat prowess ensured that any force under his command would possess a decisive advantage in the personal combat that often determined leadership within the scattered Legion. The first warband to fall under Lucius's control had originally been led by Captain Verocian, a veteran of the Great Crusade whose obsession with sonic weaponry had driven him to develop increasingly exotic and destructive sound-based armaments. Verocian's forces specialized in urban warfare, using their modified weapons to bring down entire city blocks, while their enhanced hearing allowed them to navigate through the acoustic chaos they created. The captain's tactical abilities were considerable, but his pride in his innovations ultimately proved his undoing when he challenged Lucius to demonstrate whether blade could triumph over sound. The duel took place in the ruins of a hive city on Mordian, with Verocian's sonic blaster creating waves of destructive sound that should have liquefied any opponent before they could close to melee range. The captain had positioned himself in an amphitheater whose acoustics amplified his weapon's effects, confident that the terrain would provide him with an insurmountable advantage. His satisfaction at witnessing Lucius's apparent disintegration under the sonic assault triggered the curse's mechanism, transforming his moment of triumph into the catalyst for his own destruction. The warband that Lucius inherited from Verocian's transformation included approximately 200 Emperor's Children Marines, along with supporting elements of Chaos cultists and renegade Imperial Guard units that had been corrupted during previous campaigns. The force was well equipped with exotic weapons and vehicles that reflected their former leader's obsession with sonic warfare, including noise marine squads whose weaponry could level fortifications through concentrated acoustic assault. More importantly, the warband possessed a small fleet of vessels that provided the mobility necessary for the hit-and-run tactics that had become standard among the scattered Emperor's Children. Lucius's approach to command differed significantly from the methodical leadership style that had characterized the Legion during the Great Crusade. Where previous commanders had emphasized coordination and tactical doctrine, the Cursed Champion operated according to principles that prioritized personal combat and the pursuit of perfect sensation over conventional military objectives. His strategies focused on identifying opponents whose defeat would provide the most intense experiences, regardless of their tactical significance or the resources required to engage them. The warband's organizational structure reflected this philosophy, with traditional command hierarchies replaced by systems based on combat prowess and the ability to provide Lucius with worthy opponents. Squad leaders were selected not for their tactical acumen, but for their skill in identifying challenging foes and orchestrating encounters that would satisfy their commander's appetite for sensation. This approach created a force that excelled at targeted assassinations and dueling actions, but struggled with conventional military operations that required sustained coordination. The relationship between Lucius and his subordinates operated through a combination of fear, admiration, and shared addiction to the sensations that combat provided. The Marines under his command had witnessed his resurrections firsthand, understanding that their leader's defeat in combat would merely result in his return in a new form, while potentially claiming the life of whoever had achieved the victory. This knowledge created a unique form of loyalty, with subordinates actively working to ensure that Lucius faced only opponents whose deaths would benefit the warband rather than individuals whose transformation might deprive them of their leader's services. The Warband's recruitment practices reflected the fragmented nature of the post-heresy Emperor's children, drawing new members from a variety of sources rather than relying on traditional Legion structures. Renegade Space Marines from other legions who had developed similar obsessions with combat and sensation found themselves welcomed into Lucius's forces, their skills evaluated through ritual duels that served both as tests of ability and sources of entertainment. Chaos cultists who demonstrated exceptional prowess with blade weapons could earn positions of responsibility within the Warband's hierarchy, though they remained subordinate to the Astartes who formed its core. The integration of these diverse elements required careful management of competing egos and conflicting loyalties. Lucius addressed these challenges through a system of ritualized combat that allowed ambitious subordinates to advance through the ranks, while providing him with regular opportunities to witness skilled dueling. These internal competitions served multiple purposes within the Warband's structure, maintaining combat readiness while satisfying the various appetites for violence and dominance that drove individual members. The Warband's relationship with other Emperor's Children forces reflected the broader fragmentation that had affected the Legion following the heresy. Some commanders viewed Lucius's growing influence with suspicion, recognizing that his supernatural abilities and reputation for invincibility posed potential threats to their own authority. Others sought to form alliances with his forces, hoping to benefit from his combat prowess while avoiding the risks associated with challenging him directly. Commander Eidolon, one of the few senior Emperor's Children officers to survive the Legion's collapse with his authority intact, maintained a complex relationship with Lucius that combined mutual respect with underlying tension. Eidolon's own transformation into a demon, Prince had granted him abilities that rivaled those of the Cursed Champion, while his position as one of Fulgrim's favored servants provided him with resources and influence that exceeded what most Warband leaders could command. The two champions occasionally cooperated on campaigns that required their combined abilities, but their interactions were characterized by careful maneuvering, as each sought to avoid providing the other with opportunities for advancement at their expense. The Noise Marine cult that had emerged within the scattered Emperor's Children created additional complications for Lucius's command structure. These warriors, whose devotion to sonic weaponry had evolved into a form of religious obsession, operated according to principles that sometimes conflicted with the Cursed Champion's focus on blade combat. Their weapons provided devastating firepower that could eliminate entire enemy formations, but their reliance on ranged destruction reduced opportunities for the personal combat that Lucius craved. Managing these competing priorities required diplomatic skills that the Cursed Champion had not needed to develop during his earlier career. The strategic objectives that drove Lucius's campaigns reflected his transformation from loyal Astartes to champion of Slaanesh, where the Emperor's Children had once fought to expand human dominion across the galaxy. The Cursed Champion now pursued goals that served the Prince of Pleasure's cosmic designs. His targets were selected not for their strategic value, but for the quality of opposition they could provide, with entire worlds sometimes invaded simply because they harbored warriors whose defeat would offer particularly intense sensations. The pursuit of these objectives required intelligence networks that could identify suitable opponents across the galaxy's vast expanse. Lucius's forces maintained contacts with information brokers, renegade astropaths, and chaos cultists who could provide details about potential targets and their capabilities. The Warband's fleet included specialized vessels equipped with enhanced sensors and communication, arrays that allowed them to monitor Imperial communications and identify locations where skilled warriors might be found. The selection of targets followed criteria that would have seemed incomprehensible to conventional military commanders. A fortress world defended by veteran guard regiments might be ignored in favor of a shrine world protected by a single company of space marines, if intelligence suggested that the Astartes officers possessed exceptional dueling skills. Similarly, major strategic objectives might be abandoned if scouts reported the presence of individuals whose combat abilities promised more satisfying encounters than those offered by the original target. The execution of these campaigns required tactical flexibility that exceeded the capabilities of most Chaos warbands. Lucius's forces needed to be able to conduct precision strikes against specific individuals while avoiding the kind of prolonged engagements that would attract Imperial reinforcements. This approach demanded specialized equipment and training that differed significantly from the mass assault tactics favored by many Chaos forces, with emphasis placed on stealth, mobility, and the ability to extract key personnel from heavily defended positions. The Warband's fleet reflected these operational requirements, consisting primarily of fast strike cruisers and escort vessels capable of rapid deployment and extraction. The ships were equipped with teleportation systems that allowed small assault forces to bypass conventional defenses, while their enhanced engines provided the speed necessary to escape Imperial pursuit. The vessel's weapon systems emphasized precision over raw firepower, with lance batteries and focused plasma arrays designed to eliminate specific targets rather than conduct orbital bombardment. The relationship between Lucius's warband and the broader Chaos war effort remained complex and often contradictory. While the Cursed Champion's forces occasionally participated in larger campaigns alongside other traitor legions, their specialized focus on individual combat made them unsuitable for many conventional military operations. Black Crusades and major invasions required sustained coordination and the ability to hold territory against Imperial counterattacks, capabilities that Lucius's forces possessed only in limited quantities. This operational limitation was offset by the Warband's effectiveness in specific roles that other Chaos forces found difficult to fulfill. The assassination of key Imperial commanders, the elimination of particularly skilled enemy champions, and the disruption of Loyalist morale through spectacular displays of combat prowess were all missions that played to Lucius's strengths. These contributions earned the Warband respect within the broader Chaos hierarchy, while allowing them to maintain their independence from larger organizational structures. The Cursed Champion's relationship with other Slaanesh-aligned forces created additional opportunities for cooperation and conflict. Demon princes who served the Prince of Pleasure sometimes requested Lucius's assistance with campaigns that required his particular skills, offering rewards in the form of information about potential opponents or access to exotic weapons and equipment. These arrangements were typically temporary, with both parties understanding that their alliance would last only as long as their interests remained aligned. The Emperor's children's scattered nature meant that Lucius occasionally encountered other elements of his former legion during his campaigns, creating situations that required careful diplomatic handling. Some of these meetings resulted in temporary alliances or the absorption of smaller warbands into his growing forces, while others led to conflicts that tested his abilities against opponents who understood his techniques and limitations. These encounters with former battle brothers provided unique forms of sensation that differed qualitatively from combat against Imperial or alien opponents. The gradual expansion of Lucius's influence within the fragmented Emperor's children reflected both his combat prowess and his supernatural resilience. Warband leaders who might have challenged other commanders found themselves reluctant to face an opponent whose defeat would merely result in their own transformation into his new host body. This reputation for invincibility created a form of psychological warfare that often proved as effective as direct combat, with potential rivals choosing submission over the certainty of Pyrrhic victory. The administrative challenges of commanding an ever-growing warband required skills that Lucius had not needed to develop during his earlier career as a line officer. The coordination of multiple vessels, the management of diverse personnel, and the maintenance of complex supply chains all demanded attention to details that had previously been handled by specialized staff officers. The Cursed Champion addressed these requirements by delegating authority to subordinates whose competence in these areas complemented his own focus on combat operations. The warband's continued growth brought it to the attention of imperial authorities, who began to recognize Lucius as a significant threat requiring specialized countermeasures. Ordo Malleus inquisitors compiled detailed files on his capabilities and operational patterns, while Deathwatch kill teams received specific training in tactics designed to counter his supernatural abilities. These imperial responses created new challenges for the warband's operations, while providing Lucius with increasingly skilled opponents whose defeat offered correspondingly intense sensations. The recognition of Lucius as a major threat by imperial authorities marked the beginning of a new phase in his eternal existence, one characterized by increasingly sophisticated opposition and correspondingly intense combat experiences. The Ordo Malleus had compiled extensive files on his operational patterns, documenting his preference for targeting skilled individual opponents over strategic objectives of conventional military value. This intelligence-gathering effort revealed disturbing patterns in the Cursed Champion's activities that suggested a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded simple bloodlust or random violence. The first major imperial response came during the Macharian Crusade in the 39th millennium, when Lucius's warband began targeting the expedition's most skilled officers for elimination. The Cursed Champion had identified the crusade as a target-rich environment, with veteran commanders from across the Imperium assembled under a single banner and operating in relatively predictable patterns. His initial strikes focused on regimental colonels and company captains, whose reputations for personal combat prowess had earned them recognition within the Imperial Guard hierarchy. Colonel Mordian Thrace of the Vestroyan 15th Firstborn became one of Lucius's earliest victims during this campaign. The Vestroyan officer had earned his reputation through decades of service in the galaxy's most contested war zones, his skill with both lasgun and chainsword making him a formidable opponent in any engagement. Thrace's tactical acumen had seen his regiment through numerous compliance actions, while his personal combat abilities had been demonstrated in formal duels against challengers from across the Imperial Guard's officer corps. The assassination took place during a regimental review on the industrial world of Mordax Prime, with Lucius infiltrating the ceremony through methods that bypassed both electronic surveillance and human sentries. The Cursed Champion's approach demonstrated the sophisticated planning capabilities that his warband had developed, using detailed intelligence about Vestroyan military traditions to predict the exact timing and location where Thrace would be most vulnerable to direct assault. The duel itself lasted less than 10 minutes, but its intensity provided sensations that satisfied Lucius's most demanding appetites. Thrace fought with the disciplined fury characteristic of Vestroyan officers, his movements economical and precise as he sought to counter techniques that exceeded anything in his previous experience. The colonel's chainsword carved efficient arcs through the air, each strike calculated to maximize damage while conserving energy for prolonged combat. His defensive posture incorporated elements of both guard doctrine and personal innovation, creating a fighting style that reflected decades of battlefield experience. The Vestroyan's death came through a combination of superior technique and supernatural enhancement that highlighted the futility of conventional training against opponents whose abilities had been augmented by chaos influence. Lucius's blade found its mark with surgical precision, the killing stroke delivered with an artistry that transformed violence into something approaching performance. The colonel's final expression, captured forever on the Cursed Champion's armor, reflected both surprise at being outmatched and grudging respect for his opponent's skill. The systematic elimination of skilled officers throughout the Macharian Crusade forces created a pattern that Imperial intelligence services eventually recognized as deliberate targeting rather than random violence. Lucius's preference for opponents whose combat abilities exceeded normal human limitations became apparent as the casualty lists accumulated, with each victim sharing characteristics that suggested careful selection based on specific criteria. The Cursed Champion was not simply killing Imperial personnel, but was actively hunting individuals whose defeat would provide particular forms of stimulation. The Death Watch response to these assassinations represented one of the first coordinated attempts to counter Lucius's activities using specialized anti-chaos tactics. Kill Team Umbral, composed of veterans from multiple Space Marine chapters, received specific training in techniques designed to exploit the psychological triggers that govern the Cursed Champion's resurrection curse. Their approach emphasized overwhelming firepower and coordinated assault, seeking to eliminate Lucius through methods that would minimize individual satisfaction or pride in the achievement. The encounter between Kill Team Umbral and Lucius's forces took place in the Underhive of Necromunda, where the Cursed Champion had been tracking a Goliath gang leader whose reputation for close combat prowess had attracted his attention. The Death Watch veterans had positioned themselves to intercept the Emperor's Children warband during their extraction phase, when tactical doctrines suggested they would be most vulnerable to coordinated assault. The kill team's weapons loadout emphasized high explosive ordnance and concentrated plasma fire, armaments designed to vaporize targets rather than engage them in personal combat. The initial exchange demonstrated the effectiveness of the Death Watch tactical approach, with concentrated fire from multiple heavy weapons reducing several Emperor's Children Marines to component atoms before they could respond. The kill team's coordination reflected years of training against chaos forces, their movements economical and precise as they sought to maintain maximum firepower, while avoiding the kind of individual heroics that might trigger the curse's mechanism. Lucius's response to this assault revealed the tactical adaptations his warband had developed to counter increasingly sophisticated Imperial opposition. Rather than engaging the Death Watch veterans directly, he used the Underhive's complex terrain to separate individual kill team members from their supporting elements. The Cursed Champion's movements through the industrial maze demonstrated an understanding of urban warfare that exceeded what most Chaos champions possessed, his route selection forcing the Death Watch veterans into situations where their coordinated firepower advantage was neutralized. The systematic elimination of Kill Team Umbral members illustrated the limitations of conventional anti-chaos tactics when applied to opponents whose abilities transcended normal parameters. Each Death Watch veteran fought with skills honed through decades of service against the galaxy's most dangerous threats, their combat techniques incorporating elements specifically designed to counter supernatural opponents. However, their training had not prepared them for an adversary whose resurrection ability made conventional victory conditions meaningless. Brother Sergeant Castor of the Imperial Fists became the final member of Kill Team Umbral to face Lucius in direct combat, the encounter taking place in a manufactory complex whose machinery provided both cover and obstacles for the combatants. The Imperial Fists veteran had witnessed the deaths of his battle brothers, understanding that conventional tactics had proven insufficient against their supernatural opponent. His approach emphasized defensive techniques and tactical patience, seeking to identify weaknesses that might be exploited through careful observation rather than direct assault. The duel between Castor and Lucius demonstrated the qualitative difference between opponents trained in anti-chaos warfare and those whose experience came from conventional military operations. The Imperial Fists Sergeant's techniques incorporated elements designed to counter supernatural speed and strength, his movements calculated to minimize exposure while maintaining offensive capability. His power sword traced precise patterns through the air, each strike positioned to exploit gaps in the Cursed Champion's defenses, while avoiding the flowing, serpentine counterattacks that had claimed his battle brothers. The encounter's duration exceeded anything Lucius had experienced since his resurrection following the Siege of Terra, with Castor's defensive expertise forcing the Cursed Champion to employ techniques that tested his abilities to their limits. The Imperial Fists veterans' approach created a form of tactical chess match, with each combatant seeking to identify patterns in their opponent's fighting style that could be exploited for decisive advantage. The manufactory's machinery provided additional complications, with moving assembly lines and automated systems creating hazards that both warriors needed to navigate while maintaining their combat effectiveness. Castor's eventual defeat came not through overwhelming force, but through the gradual accumulation of minor advantages that Lucius's supernatural abilities allowed him to exploit. The Imperial Fist's sergeant's defensive techniques proved capable of countering conventional attacks, but they could not account for the cursed champion's ability to recover from wounds that should have degraded his combat effectiveness. The killing stroke, delivered with surgical precision through a gap in Castor's guard, provided sensations that reflected both the quality of opposition and the tactical challenges overcome during the encounter. The destruction of Kill Team Umbral marked a significant escalation in the Imperial response to Lucius's activities, with the Ordo Malleus recognizing that conventional Deathwatch tactics were insufficient to counter the cursed champion's abilities. Subsequent operations against his forces incorporated increasingly exotic weapons and tactics, including blessed ammunition, sanctified blade oils, and coordinated psyker support designed to disrupt the supernatural energies that sustained his existence. The Badab War provided Lucius with opportunities to test his abilities against Space Marine opponents whose skills had been honed through years of internecine conflict. The Cursed Champion's Warband arrived in the Badab sector during the conflict's later stages, when both loyalist and secessionist forces had been ground down by prolonged warfare. The tactical situation created ideal conditions for the kind of precision strikes that Lucius's forces specialized in, with isolated outposts and depleted units providing targets that could be engaged without triggering massive retaliation. Captain Corian Sumitris of the Red Scorpions became one of Lucius's primary targets during this campaign, the Astartes officer's reputation for blade work having earned him recognition throughout the chapter. Sumitris had spent the war's duration engaged in boarding actions and close-quarters combat, his skills refined through encounters with opponents who possessed comparable training and equipment. The captain's power sword had claimed dozens of enemy champions, while his tactical acumen had seen his company through numerous engagements that should have resulted in their complete destruction. The encounter between Lucius and Sumitris took place aboard a damaged battle barge drifting through the Badab system's outer reaches, the vessel's life support systems failing as both warriors sought to claim it as a prize. The ship's corridors provided an environment that favored close combat over ranged engagement, with debris and damaged bulkheads creating obstacles that channeled movement into predictable patterns. The artificial gravity fluctuated unpredictably, adding additional complications to an already challenging tactical situation. The duel itself reflected the evolution of Lucius's abilities since his early encounters with Imperial forces, his techniques now incorporating elements learned from centuries of combat against diverse opponents. The Cursed Champion's blade work displayed an artistry that transcended mere technical proficiency, each movement calculated for maximum aesthetic impact while maintaining tactical effectiveness. His fighting style had evolved beyond the rigid forms taught in the Emperor's children's training halls, becoming something more fluid and adaptive that could counter techniques from across the galaxy's warrior cultures. Sumitris fought with the disciplined fury characteristic of Red Scorpion's officers, his movements economical and precise as he sought to counter attacks that seemed to defy conventional understanding of swordplay. The captain's power sword carved luminous paths through the ship's darkened corridors, its energy field crackling as it met Lucius's blade in exchanges that generated showers of sparks and bursts of electromagnetic interference. The Red Scorpion's officers' defensive techniques incorporated elements from multiple combat doctrines, creating a fighting style that reflected both chapter traditions and personal innovation. The battle's conclusion came through a combination of superior technique and environmental exploitation that demonstrated Lucius's tactical adaptability. The Cursed Champion used the ship's failing gravity systems to execute attacks that would have been impossible under normal conditions, his movements flowing seamlessly between different orientations as he sought to confuse and disorient his opponent. Sumitris's death provided sensations that reflected both the quality of opposition and the unique challenges presented by the combat environment. The tyrannic wars created opportunities for Lucius to test his abilities against alien opponents whose combat capabilities differed radically from those of human adversaries. The Cursed Champions Warband engaged tyrannid bioforms during the closing stages of the First Tyrannic War, seeking encounters with warrior organisms whose physical capabilities exceeded normal biological limitations. These engagements provided forms of stimulation that differed qualitatively from combat against human or Astartes opponents, with alien psychology and biology creating tactical challenges that required new approaches. The encounter with a hive tyrant on the world of Prandium demonstrated the adaptability that had allowed Lucius to survive for millennia against diverse opponents. The massive bioform possessed multiple weapon symbiotes and close combat appendages, its alien intelligence directing attacks that combined overwhelming physical power with tactical sophistication that rivaled that of human commanders. The creature's chitinous armor provided protection that exceeded even Terminator plate, while its regenerative capabilities allowed it to recover from wounds that would have incapacitated lesser organisms. The duel took place in the ruins of a cathedral, whose Gothic architecture provided both cover and obstacles for the combatants. The Hive Tyrant's size advantage was partially negated by the building's confined spaces, while the debris from collapsed sections created opportunities for tactical maneuvering that favored Lucius's superior mobility. The Cursed Champion's bladework focused on joints and weak points in the creature's natural armor, seeking to exploit vulnerabilities that conventional weapons might have missed. The alien's death came through surgical strikes that demonstrated Lucius's ability to adapt his techniques to counter non-human opponents. The killing blow severed critical neural pathways that controlled the creature's motor functions, a precision strike that required intimate knowledge of tyrannid biology. The encounter provided sensations that differed significantly from combat against human opponents, with the alien's psychology creating emotional resonances that human adversaries could not duplicate. The 13th Black Crusade provided Lucius with his most significant campaign since the Horus Heresy, offering opportunities to engage Imperial defenders whose quality exceeded anything he had faced during previous millennia. The Cursed Champions Warband participated in the assault on Cadia, targeting specific fortress complexes whose commanders possessed reputations for exceptional combat prowess. The scale of the campaign allowed Lucius to select opponents from across the Imperium's military hierarchy, with guard generals, space marine captains, and even inquisitors providing targets that satisfied his appetite for worthy adversaries. Marshal Amalrich of the Black Templars became one of Lucius's primary objectives during the Cadian campaign, the Space Marine officer's reputation as a duelist having earned him recognition throughout his chapter. Amalrich had spent centuries perfecting techniques that combined Black Templars' doctrine with personal innovations, his combat style emphasizing aggressive assault over defensive maneuvering. The Marshal's power sword had claimed hundreds of enemy champions, while his tactical leadership had seen his crusade through numerous campaigns against the galaxy's most dangerous threats. The encounter between the two champions took place in the ruins of Kasser Kraf, with both warriors seeking to claim the fortress's strategic position for their respective forces. The urban environment provided numerous opportunities for tactical maneuvering, with collapsed buildings and defensive positions creating a three-dimensional battlefield that tested both combatants' spatial awareness. The sounds of the broader battle provided a backdrop of explosions and weapons fire that added intensity to their personal duel. The fight itself represented a clash between two diametrically opposed philosophies of combat, with Amalrich's righteous fury meeting Lucius's pursuit of perfect sensation. The Black Templar's Marshal fought with the disciplined aggression characteristic of his chapter, his attacks flowing seamlessly from offensive to defensive positions as he sought to overwhelm his opponent through sustained pressure. The Marshal's power sword traced precise arcs through the air, each strike calculated to penetrate the Cursed Champion's defenses while maintaining his own tactical position. Lucius countered with techniques that had been refined through millennia of combat against diverse opponents, his blade work displaying an artistry that transformed violence into something approaching performance. The Cursed Champion's fighting style incorporated elements from across the galaxy's warrior cultures, creating combinations that seemed to defy conventional understanding of swordplay. His movements possessed an almost hypnotic quality that made it difficult for observers to predict his next action, while his supernatural resilience allowed him to absorb punishment that would have incapacitated normal Astartes. The duel's conclusion provided sensations that exceeded even Lucius's elevated expectations, with Amalrich's skill forcing him to employ techniques that tested his abilities to their absolute limits. The Marshal's death came through a combination of superior experience and supernatural enhancement that highlighted the futility of conventional training against opponents whose abilities had been augmented by chaos influence. The Black Templar's officer's final expression, captured forever on the Cursed Champion's armor, reflected both defiance and a grudging recognition of his opponent's skill. The centuries following the 13th Black Crusade saw Lucius's reputation as an undefeatable champion spread throughout both Imperial and Chaos forces, creating a unique dynamic where his very presence on a battlefield could alter the psychological state of entire armies. Imperial commanders began to recognize his distinctive armor configuration and the faces of his victims that adorned its surface, while Chaos warlords sought either to recruit his services or eliminate him before he could claim their own champions as trophies. This dual recognition created opportunities for encounters with opponents whose skills had been specifically honed to counter his abilities, while simultaneously attracting challengers whose overconfidence led them to underestimate the supernatural forces that sustained his existence. Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard, despite his legion's fall to Nurgle, had maintained connections within the Imperium that allowed him to track Lucius's movements across multiple sectors. The former Death Guard officer's transformation into an agent of Malcador had provided him with resources and intelligence networks that exceeded those available to conventional Imperial forces, while his experience fighting alongside the Emperor's children during the Great Crusade gave him insights into their combat doctrines that few loyalists possessed. Garrow's pursuit of the Cursed Champion represented both personal vendetta and strategic necessity, as the continued existence of such a powerful Chaos champion posed threats that extended far beyond individual battlefields. The encounter between Garrow and Lucius took place on the Forge world of Lucius Minor, a planet whose name had drawn the Cursed Champion's attention through what he interpreted as cosmic significance. The Death Guard captain had spent months preparing for this confrontation, analyzing intelligence reports and tactical assessments to develop strategies specifically designed to counter Lucius's known capabilities. Garrow's approach emphasized the use of sanctified weapons and blessed ammunition, armaments that had been consecrated through rituals designed to disrupt the supernatural energies that sustained Chaos champions. The industrial landscape of Lucius Minor provided a battlefield that favored neither combatant, with massive manufactorums and processing facilities, creating a complex three-dimensional environment where tactical advantage could shift rapidly based on positioning and environmental exploitation. The planet's polluted atmosphere reduced visibility, while its unstable geological structure created hazards that both warriors needed to navigate during their encounter. The constant background noise of industrial machinery provided acoustic cover that allowed for tactical maneuvering, while simultaneously creating communication difficulties that isolated each combatant from potential support. Garrow's fighting style reflected decades of experience against chaos-corrupted opponents, his techniques incorporating elements specifically designed to counter supernatural speed and resilience. The Death Guard captain's movements were economical and precise, each action calculated to maximize tactical advantage while minimizing exposure to counterattack. His power sword had been modified with additional sanctification rituals, the blade's energy field crackling with energies that caused visible discomfort to the Cursed Champion upon contact. The captain's bolt pistol fired specialized ammunition that had been blessed by multiple Imperial saints, each round designed to disrupt the immaterial forces that bound Chaos champions to their patrons. The duel's initial phases demonstrated the effectiveness of Garo's preparations, with his sanctified weapons causing damage that Lucius's supernatural resilience could not immediately overcome. The blessed ammunition created wounds that resisted healing, while the consecrated blade left burns that continued to cause pain long after the initial strikes. These effects forced the cursed champion to adapt his tactics, abandoning the flowing, artistic combat style that had served him against conventional opponents in favor of more aggressive techniques designed to end the encounter quickly. Lucius's response revealed the tactical flexibility that had allowed him to survive encounters with diverse opponents across multiple millennia. The cursed champion began to exploit the industrial environment's hazards, using steam vents and unstable machinery to create opportunities for attacks that bypassed Garo's defensive preparations. His movements through the complex terrain demonstrated an understanding of three-dimensional warfare that exceeded what most Astartes possessed, with route selection that forced the Death Guard captain into positions where his sanctified weapons' advantages were neutralized. The encounter's climax came when both warriors found themselves balanced on a narrow gantry suspended above a plasma processing facility, the unstable platform swaying under their combined weight, while superheated gases created thermal updrafts that affected visibility and movement. Garo's tactical discipline proved decisive in this environment, his movements remaining controlled and precise despite the challenging conditions. The Death Guard captain's final strike penetrated Lucius's defenses through a combination of superior positioning and the disruptive effects of his sanctified blade, the consecrated weapon finding its mark with surgical precision. The cursed champion's death should have ended the encounter, but Garo's satisfaction at eliminating a significant chaos threat triggered the resurrection mechanism that bound Lucius to eternal service. The Death Guard captain's transformation into a new host body for the cursed champion represented one of the most disturbing manifestations of the curse, as Garo's decades of loyal service to the Imperium were erased and replaced by Lucius's accumulated memories and experiences. The Loyalist's face joined the collection adorning the cursed champion's armor, his expression of triumph preserved for eternity as a reminder of the encounter's true outcome. The psychological impact of consuming such a renowned Loyalist champion provided Lucius with sensations that exceeded even his demanding standards, while simultaneously demonstrating the curse's ability to corrupt individuals whose faith should have provided protection against chaos influence. The transformation incorporated Garo's tactical knowledge and combat experience into Lucius's existing capabilities, creating a synthesis that enhanced his already formidable abilities while adding new dimensions to his understanding of imperial military doctrine. Within the scattered warbands of the Emperor's children, Lucius's growing reputation created complex dynamics that combined admiration, fear, and competitive rivalry. Other champions of Slaanesh viewed his supernatural abilities with mixture of envy and caution, recognizing that direct confrontation would likely result in their own destruction, while simultaneously craving the intense sensations that defeating such an opponent would provide. This tension manifested in elaborate schemes designed to engineer Lucius's defeat through indirect means, with rival champions attempting to manipulate circumstances that would lead to encounters with opponents capable of overcoming his abilities without triggering the resurrection curse. Fabius Bile, the former emperor's children apothecary, whose genetic experiments had earned him infamy throughout the galaxy, maintained a particularly complex relationship with Lucius that combined scientific curiosity with personal animosity. Bile's transformation into the primogenitor had granted him insights into the biological and psychological mechanisms that governed chaos corruption, while his extensive research into enhancement procedures provided him with theoretical frameworks for understanding how the cursed champion's abilities functioned. The apothecary's attempts to capture Lucius for experimental purposes created a series of encounters that tested both individuals' capabilities while providing opportunities for combat that satisfied the cursed champion's appetite for worthy opponents. The first significant confrontation between Bile and Lucius occurred during a raid on the research facility known as the New Atoma, where the primogenitor had been conducting experiments on captured space marines from multiple chapters. Bile's enhanced creations, warriors whose capabilities had been augmented through genetic manipulation and surgical enhancement, provided opposition that differed qualitatively from conventional Astartes. These modified warriors possessed strength and speed that exceeded normal biological limitations, while their psychological conditioning had removed the emotional responses that typically triggered Lucius's resurrection curse. The encounter demonstrated both the sophistication of Bile's understanding and the limitations of purely scientific approaches to countering supernatural phenomena. The enhanced warriors fought with mechanical precision that made them formidable opponents, their augmented capabilities allowing them to match Lucius's speed and strength, while their emotional conditioning prevented them from experiencing the satisfaction that would trigger the curse. However, their lack of genuine skill and artistic appreciation for combat created encounters that failed to provide the intense sensations that the cursed champion craved, resulting in victories that felt hollow despite their tactical significance. Bile's personal intervention in the battle revealed the primogenitor's own evolution since the Horus Heresy, his form now incorporating biological enhancements that granted him capabilities exceeding those of conventional Astartes. The former apothecary's spider-like appendages provided additional combat options, while his enhanced nervous system allowed for reaction times that rivaled those of the cursed champion. The duel between these two corrupted veterans of the Third Legion showcased techniques that had been refined through centuries of warfare and experimentation, with each combatant employing approaches that reflected their particular path of corruption. The battle's outcome remained inconclusive, with both champions recognizing that their encounter had reached a stalemate that could only be resolved through methods that neither was prepared to employ. Bile's scientific detachment prevented him from experiencing the emotional satisfaction necessary to trigger the resurrection curse, while Lucius's supernatural abilities proved insufficient to overcome the primogenitor's enhanced physiology and tactical preparation. The encounter ended with both warriors withdrawing to reassess their approaches, their mutual respect tempered by the understanding that future confrontations would require different strategies. The rivalry between Lucius and other Slaanesh champions extended beyond the Emperor's children to include warriors from other legions who had embraced the Prince of Pleasure's patronage. Karn the Betrayer of the World Eaters, despite his primary allegiance to Khorne, had developed a reputation for combat prowess that attracted Lucius's attention during several campaigns where their respective warbands operated in proximity. The fundamental differences between their patron deities created philosophical conflicts that manifested in their approaches to warfare, with Karn's emphasis on overwhelming violence contrasting sharply with Lucius's pursuit of perfect technique. Their first direct confrontation occurred during the siege of the Shrine World Ophelia 7, where both champions had been drawn by reports of Adeptus Sororitas forces, whose combat abilities promised worthy opposition. The encounter took place in the ruins of a cathedral whose Gothic architecture provided both tactical opportunities and symbolic significance for the combatants. Karn's approach emphasized brutal efficiency, his chain axe carving through obstacles and opponents with equal facility as he sought to reach his target through the most direct route possible. Lucius countered with techniques that emphasized mobility and precision over raw force, his blade work creating patterns of movement that allowed him to evade Karn's devastating attacks while seeking opportunities for counterstrikes. The Cursed Champion's fighting style incorporated elements designed to exploit the Berserker's tendency toward reckless aggression, using the World Eater's champion's momentum against him, while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid the crushing blows that had claimed countless previous opponents. The duel's intensity exceeded anything either warrior had experienced in recent centuries, with Karn's supernatural fury meeting Lucius's, pursuit of perfect sensation in exchanges that generated shockwaves powerful enough to crack the cathedral's ancient stonework. The World Eater's champion's chain axe traced luminous arcs through the air as its teeth bit into stone and metal with equal facility, while the cursed champion's blade created afterimages that seemed to hang in the air like frozen lightning. The sounds of their combat echoed through the ruined structure with sufficient volume to be heard over the broader battle raging throughout the city. The encounter's conclusion came not through decisive victory by either combatant, but through the intervention of external forces that required both champions to withdraw and reassess their tactical situations. Imperial reinforcements arriving in the cathedral's vicinity forced both warriors to abandon their duel in favor of broader strategic considerations, leaving their rivalry unresolved, but intensified by the recognition of each other's capabilities. The incomplete nature of their confrontation created psychological tensions that would influence future encounters between their respective forces. Among the loyalist Space Marines, Lucius's reputation had spawned specialized training programs designed to prepare champions for potential encounters with the cursed swordsman. The Imperial Fists had developed combat doctrines that emphasized defensive techniques and emotional control, seeking to create warriors who could defeat Chaos champions without experiencing the satisfaction that triggered supernatural curses. These programs produced officers whose skills exceeded normal chapter standards while incorporating psychological conditioning designed to maintain tactical focus under extreme combat stress. Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fists became one of the most prominent graduates of these specialized programs, his combat abilities honed through decades of training against simulated chaos opponents. The captain's hammer, Fist of Dorn, had been consecrated through rituals that incorporated elements from multiple Imperial saints, while his Terminator armor provided protection that exceeded standard patterns through additional sanctification procedures. Lysander's tactical approach emphasized overwhelming force delivered through precisely timed strikes, seeking to eliminate opponents before they could employ supernatural abilities or tactical adaptations. The encounter between Lysander and Lucius took place during the defense of the fortress world in Wit, where the cursed champion's warband had launched a precision strike against the planet's command facilities. The Imperial Fist's captain had positioned himself to intercept the Emperor's children forces during their extraction phase, when tactical doctrine suggested they would be most vulnerable to coordinated assault. The battle occurred in the fortress's central courtyard, an environment that favored neither combatant while providing sufficient space for both warriors to employ their preferred combat techniques. Lysander's initial assault demonstrated the effectiveness of Imperial Fist's training doctrine, with his thunder hammer delivering blows that created craters in the courtyard's reinforced flooring, while generating shockwaves that affected the stability of surrounding structures. The captain's Terminator armor provided protection that allowed him to absorb punishment that would have incapacitated lighter armored opponents, while his tactical discipline maintained his offensive momentum despite the cursed champion's attempts to exploit environmental hazards. Lucius adapted to this overwhelming assault through techniques that emphasized speed and precision over direct confrontation, his blade work focusing on joints and weak points in the captain's heavy armor. The cursed champion's movements flowed around Lysander's attacks like water around stone, seeking opportunities for strikes that could penetrate Terminator plate through accumulated damage rather than single devastating blows. His supernatural resilience allowed him to absorb glancing hits from the thunder hammer while maintaining sufficient mobility to avoid direct impacts that would have proven instantly fatal. The duel's progression revealed the limitations of both combatants' approaches, with Lysander's overwhelming force proving insufficient to pin down an opponent whose mobility exceeded normal parameters, while Lucius's precision strikes struggled to penetrate armor that had been specifically designed to counter such attacks. The encounter evolved into a battle of attrition, with each warrior seeking to exploit minor advantages that could be accumulated into decisive superiority over time. The captain's eventual defeat came through a combination of environmental exploitation and tactical adaptation that demonstrated Lucius's ability to overcome opponents whose preparations had been specifically designed to counter his abilities. The Cursed Champion used the fortress's defensive systems against Lysander, manipulating automated weapons to create crossfire that forced the Imperial Fist's captain into positions where his armor's protection was compromised. The killing stroke penetrated a joint in the Terminator plate that had been weakened by accumulated damage, the blade finding its mark with surgical precision that reflected centuries of experience against heavily armored opponents. Lysander's transformation into Lucius's new host body represented a significant victory for Chaos forces, as the captain's tactical knowledge and combat experience provided insights into Imperial Fist's doctrine that could be exploited in future encounters. The Loyalist's face joined the collection adorning the Cursed Champion's armor, his expression of determination preserved for eternity as a testament to the futility of conventional training against supernatural opponents. The Death Watch had developed increasingly sophisticated protocols for engaging Lucius following the destruction of Kill Team Umbral, with new tactical doctrines emphasizing coordinated assault and emotional detachment. Watch Captain Artemis had spent years analyzing intelligence reports and combat recordings to develop strategies that could exploit weaknesses in the Cursed Champion's supernatural abilities. These approaches incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters, while introducing new elements designed to counter the tactical adaptations that Lucius had demonstrated during recent campaigns. The specialized kill teams deployed against Lucius-incorporated warriors from chapters whose combat doctrines emphasized different approaches to warfare, creating tactical flexibility that exceeded what single chapter forces could provide. Iron Hands veterans provided expertise in anti-supernatural warfare, while Raven Guard specialists contributed stealth capabilities that allowed for precision strikes against isolated targets. Salamander's artificers had developed specialized ammunition and weapons modifications designed to disrupt the immaterial energies that sustained Chaos Champions, while Imperial Fist's tactical experts provided coordination and fire support that maximized the effectiveness of combined operations. These enhanced capabilities created encounters that tested Lucius's abilities in ways that previous Imperial forces had been unable to achieve, forcing him to develop new tactical approaches while providing combat experiences that satisfied his appetite for worthy opposition. The escalating sophistication of Imperial countermeasures created a form of evolutionary pressure that drove both sides to develop increasingly advanced techniques and capabilities, resulting in conflicts that exceeded the intensity of conventional warfare while providing insights into the fundamental nature of the struggle between order and chaos. The escalating sophistication of Imperial countermeasures and the growing recognition of Lucius as a strategic threat rather than merely a tactical nuisance raised fundamental questions about his nature within the broader hierarchy of Chaos forces. For over 10 millennia, the Cursed Champion had served Slaanesh with unwavering devotion, accumulating victories and sensations that would have elevated lesser servants to demonhood centuries earlier. Yet Lucius remained bound to mortal flesh, his existence sustained by the resurrection curse rather than the fundamental transformation that marked ascension to demon princehood. This apparent stagnation puzzled Imperial scholars and chaos theorists alike, particularly given the obvious favor that the Prince of Pleasure showed toward his eternal champion. The traditional path to demon princehood within Slaanesh's hierarchy required not merely exceptional service, but a fundamental surrender of mortal identity that few champions could achieve. Demon princes like Fulgrim had transcended their physical limitations through acts of such profound corruption that their very essence became aligned with their patron deity's nature. These transformations represented complete metamorphosis, with the former mortal's consciousness becoming a facet of their god's infinite complexity, while retaining enough individual identity to function as an independent agent within the material realm. Lucius's situation differed fundamentally from these conventional ascensions. His curse bound him to a cycle of death and resurrection that maintained his connection to mortal existence, while granting him capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. Each death and subsequent return reinforced his ties to the physical realm rather than weakening them, creating a form of immortality that operated through entirely different mechanisms than demonic existence. The faces of his victims that adorned his armor served as anchors to material reality, their preserved consciousness creating a complex web of mortal connections that prevented the complete dissolution of identity that demonhood required. The nature of Lucius's current existence represented a unique form of chaos blessing that combined elements of both mortal and demonic nature without fully embracing either state. His physical form remained essentially human despite centuries of corruption and enhancement, with his Astartes physiology providing the foundation for supernatural abilities rather than being replaced by demonic essence. The curse that sustained him operated through principles that existed at the intersection of material and immaterial realms, drawing power from both sources while remaining fully committed to neither. This hybrid existence provided Slaanesh with capabilities that conventional demon princes could not offer. Lucius's ability to operate freely within the material realm, without the restrictions that bound true demons, made him an ideal agent for missions that required sustained presence in real space. His resurrection curse ensured continuity of service regardless of battlefield casualties, while his accumulated experience across multiple host bodies provided tactical knowledge that spanned millennia of warfare. The Prince of Pleasure had crafted a servant whose utility exceeded that of conventional champions, while maintaining the flexibility to deploy him in situations where demon princes would face significant limitations. The question of whether the curse actively prevented Lucius's ascension to demon princehood remained a subject of intense speculation among those few imperial scholars who possessed sufficient knowledge of chaos theology to address such matters. The Ordo Malleus had compiled extensive analyses of the cursed champion's operational patterns, noting that his behavior consistently prioritized personal combat and sensation, seeking over the kind of strategic corruption campaigns that typically preceded demonic ascension. This focus suggested either that the curse constrained his ability to pursue activities that would lead to transformation, or that Slaanesh actively discouraged such development in favor of maintaining his current utility. The theological implications of Lucius's existence challenged conventional understanding of how chaos patronage functioned within the broader context of the Great Game. Most chaos champions served their patrons through acts that gradually eroded their humanity while strengthening their connection to the immaterial realm, with demon princehood representing the ultimate reward for complete surrender to chaos influence. Lucius's path reversed this progression, with each resurrection reinforcing his mortal nature while simultaneously deepening his corruption. This apparent contradiction suggested that the Prince of Pleasure had developed alternative approaches to champion cultivation that operated outside established patterns. The comparison with other long-serving chaos champions revealed the uniqueness of Lucius's situation within the broader hierarchy of Slaanesh's servants. Fabius Bile had maintained his essential humanity through different means, using scientific knowledge and genetic manipulation to preserve his mortal form while accumulating power and influence that rivaled those of demon princes. However, Bile's approach required constant effort and resource expenditure to maintain, while Lucius's curse operated automatically without conscious intervention or external support. Eidolon's ascension to demon princehood provided a direct contrast to Lucius's continued mortal existence, demonstrating that elevation remained possible for Emperor's children champions who pursued appropriate paths. Eidolon's transformation had occurred through conventional means, with his accumulated service and corruption eventually reaching thresholds that triggered Slaanesh's direct intervention. The Demon Prince's current capabilities exceeded those of mortal champions in many respects, but his existence was constrained by the limitations that affected all demonic entities operating within the material realm. The strategic advantages that Lucius's current form provided to Slaanesh became apparent when comparing his operational flexibility with that of demon princes. True demons required specific conditions to manifest within real space, often depending on rituals, summoning circles, or areas of significant warp influence to maintain stable existence. These requirements limited their deployment options while making them vulnerable to banishment through appropriate countermeasures. Lucius faced no such restrictions, his mortal form allowing him to operate freely in any environment, while his resurrection curse ensured that conventional banishment techniques remained ineffective. The curse's operation through mortal psychology rather than demonic essence provided additional advantages that demon princes could not replicate. The mechanism required pride or satisfaction from his killers, emotions that were fundamentally human in nature, and therefore difficult for demonic entities to manipulate directly. This psychological component made the curse nearly impossible to counter through conventional anti-demon tactics, while its reliance on mortal emotions ensured that it would remain effective as long as sentient beings capable of pride existed within the galaxy. The accumulated knowledge and experience that Lucius gained through his successive resurrections created a form of evolutionary development that differed significantly from demonic growth patterns. Each new host body brought with it memories, skills, and capabilities that enhanced his overall effectiveness while maintaining continuity of identity across transformations. This process created a form of guided evolution that improved his combat abilities over time while preserving the essential characteristics that made him valuable to Slaanesh. The faces adorning Lucius's armor represented more than mere trophies or psychological weapons. They served as repositories of consciousness and experience that enriched his understanding of mortal nature. Each preserved visage contained fragments of its original owner's knowledge and capabilities, creating a collective intelligence that exceeded what any individual could achieve. This accumulated wisdom provided insights into diverse combat techniques, tactical approaches, and psychological patterns that enhanced his effectiveness against opponents from across the galaxy's warrior cultures. The relationship between Lucius and these preserved consciousnesses operated through mechanisms that existed beyond conventional understanding of identity and awareness. The faces were not merely decorative elements, but active components of his existence, their trapped awareness contributing to his tactical decision-making while experiencing the sensations that his actions provided. This symbiotic relationship created a form of collective consciousness that served Slaanesh's purposes while maintaining the individual identities that made each contribution unique. The Prince of Pleasure's investment in maintaining Lucius's current form rather than elevating him to demon princehood reflected sophisticated understanding of how different types of servants could best advance chaos interests. Demon princes excelled at corruption campaigns and large-scale strategic operations, their supernatural abilities and immortal nature making them ideal for long-term projects that required sustained effort over centuries or millennia. Lucius's role was more specialized but equally valuable, his focus on individual combat and precision operations providing capabilities that complemented rather than duplicated those of demonic servants. The curse's design incorporated safeguards that prevented Lucius from accumulating the kind of strategic influence that typically preceded demonic ascension. His focus on personal combat rather than territorial conquest limited his ability to establish the power bases that most demon princes required for their transformation. The resurrection mechanism ensured that he remained focused on immediate tactical objectives rather than long-term strategic planning, creating a form of psychological constraint that channeled his ambitions in directions that served Slaanesh's purposes without threatening the existing hierarchy. The question of whether Lucius possessed the capability to break free from his curse and pursue conventional ascension remained purely theoretical, as no recorded instance existed of him attempting such liberation. The accumulated evidence suggested that the curse had become so integral to his identity that separation would likely result in his complete destruction rather than transformation to a different state. The faces on his armor, the resurrection mechanism, and his accumulated experiences had created a form of existence that transcended normal categories of mortal or demonic nature. The strategic value that Lucius provided in his current form exceeded what most demon princes could offer in terms of operational flexibility and tactical effectiveness. His ability to operate independently without support infrastructure made him ideal for deep strike missions and precision operations that required minimal resource commitment. The Resurrection Curse ensured that mission failure due to his death would result in eventual success through his return, while his accumulated experience provided tactical knowledge that improved with each encounter. The Prince of Pleasure's apparent satisfaction with Lucius's current state suggested that demon princehood was not necessarily the ultimate reward for exceptional service, but rather one of several possible paths that served different purposes within Chaos hierarchy. The Cursed Champion's existence demonstrated that alternative forms of immortality and power could provide equal or superior utility depending on specific operational requirements and strategic objectives. The implications of Lucius's unique status extended beyond individual considerations to broader questions about the nature of Chaos patronage and the relationship between mortal servants and their divine masters. His existence proved that the traditional progression from mortal champion to demon prince was not inevitable, but represented one of multiple possible evolutionary paths. This revelation suggested that Chaos entities possessed far greater flexibility in how they cultivated and deployed their servants than Imperial scholars had previously understood. The continued effectiveness of Lucius's curse after 10 millennia of operation demonstrated the sophisticated nature of Slaanesh's creation and the careful consideration that had gone into its design. The mechanism had proven adaptable to changing tactical environments while maintaining its core functionality across encounters with diverse opponents and countermeasures. This durability suggested that the Prince of Pleasure had invested considerable effort in crafting a form of immortality that would remain effective regardless of technological or tactical developments. The psychological impact of Lucius's existence on both Imperial and Chaos forces reflected the unique nature of his curse and its implications for conventional understanding of death and victory. Imperial commanders who understood the resurrection mechanism faced the disturbing realization that defeating him in combat would likely result in their own destruction, while Chaos champions recognized that challenging him carried risks that extended beyond simple battlefield death. This reputation created a form of psychological warfare that enhanced his tactical effectiveness while serving Slaanesh's broader purposes. The weapons and equipment that Lucius carries into battle represent more than mere tools of war. They are extensions of his corrupted essence, artifacts that have been shaped by millennia of violence and transformed by the dark energies that sustain his existence. Each piece of his wargear tells a story of conquest and corruption, their forms twisted by exposure to the immaterial forces that flow through their wielder, while maintaining the deadly functionality that has made him the galaxy's most feared duelist. The Lash of Torment stands as perhaps the most distinctive weapon in Lucius's arsenal, a creation that embodies the Prince of Pleasure's approach to warfare through its fusion of pain and precision. The weapon appears as a segmented whip composed of razor-sharp ceramite links, each segment inscribed with microscopic runes that channel the wielder's sadistic impulses into physical manifestations of agony. The lash extends to variable lengths depending on the tactical situation, its segments capable of separating and reconnecting through mechanisms that operate beyond conventional understanding of materials science. The weapon's construction incorporates elements that exist at the intersection of advanced technology and supernatural influence. The ceramite segments contain neural interface nodes that connect directly to Lucius's enhanced nervous system, allowing him to control each individual link with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. These connections create a feedback loop that transmits the sensations experienced by the weapon's targets directly to its wielder, providing forms of stimulation that conventional weapons cannot duplicate. The neural pathways glow with faint bioluminescence when the weapon is active, creating patterns of light that flow along the lash's length like liquid fire. The Lash of Torment's combat applications extend far beyond those of conventional whip weapons, its segmented construction allowing for attacks that seem to defy physics through their complexity and precision. Individual segments can separate from the main body to strike multiple targets simultaneously, while the weapon's variable length permits engagement at ranges that confuse opponents accustomed to predictable weapon characteristics. The lash can wrap around enemy weapons to disarm skilled opponents, entangle limbs to restrict movement, or deliver precise strikes to vulnerable points with surgical accuracy. The weapon's most disturbing characteristic lies in its ability to inflict pain that transcends purely physical damage. Victims struck by the Lash of Torment experience sensations that bypass normal pain receptors to affect the nervous system directly, creating agony that cannot be blocked by conventional armor or pain suppressants. These effects linger long after the initial strike, with victims reporting continued suffering that intensifies rather than diminishes over time. The psychological impact of these prolonged effects often proves more devastating than the physical wounds themselves, as opponents find their concentration and combat effectiveness degraded by persistent torment. The lash responds to its wielder's emotional state, becoming more aggressive and unpredictable as Lucius experiences greater levels of stimulation during combat. The weapon seems to develop a form of rudimentary consciousness during extended battles, its movements becoming increasingly independent as it seeks out targets that will provide the most intense sensations. This semi-autonomous behavior allows Lucius to focus on primary opponents while the lash engages secondary threats, creating a form of tactical multitasking that exceeds what conventional weapons permit. The construction materials used in the Lash of Torment include elements that cannot be found in standard Imperial or Chaos armories. The ceramite segments contain traces of metals that exist only within the Eye of Terror, their atomic structure altered by prolonged exposure to warp energies until they exhibit properties that conventional physics cannot explain. These exotic materials provide the weapon with durability that exceeds normal ceramite, while allowing it to channel supernatural energies without degradation or structural failure. Lucius's power armor represents the culmination of 10 millennia of continuous modification and enhancement, its current form bearing little resemblance to the Mark IV plate he wore during the Great Crusade. The armor's basic structure remains recognizably Astartes in origin, but every component has been altered through a combination of technological advancement and supernatural corruption. The ceramite plates flow like living tissue when viewed from certain angles, their surfaces rippling with patterns that suggest organic growth rather than mechanical construction. The most immediately recognizable feature of the armor is the collection of faces that adorn its surface, each visage representing a warrior who has fallen victim to the resurrection curse. These faces are not merely decorative elements but integral components of the armor's function, their preserved consciousness contributing to the wearer's tactical awareness while experiencing the sensations that combat provides. The faces shift position across the armor's surface according to patterns that reflect Lucius's emotional state and the intensity of current combat situations. The armor's power source operates through principles that combine conventional fusion technology with energy drawn directly from the warp. The reactor's output fluctuates based on the wearer's level of stimulation, providing increased power during moments of intense combat while maintaining baseline functionality during periods of relative calm. This variable output allows the armor to enhance Lucius's physical capabilities beyond normal Astartes parameters when tactical situations demand maximum performance, while the warp-based components ensure that power remains available even in environments where conventional technology fails. The helmet's design reflects the armor's overall corruption while maintaining the functional requirements of Astartes combat systems. The faceplate bears a permanent expression of ecstatic agony, its features twisted into a rictus that captures the exact moment of transcendent sensation that marked Lucius's first true embrace of Slaanesh's gifts. The optical sensors have been replaced with organic components that provide enhanced visual acuity while allowing the wearer to perceive electromagnetic spectra invisible to normal human sight. The armor's internal systems include life support mechanisms that have been modified to enhance rather than merely sustain the wearer's biological functions. Stimulant injectors deliver cocktails of combat drugs and sensation enhancers directly into the bloodstream, their effects calibrated to provide maximum combat effectiveness while intensifying the physical experiences that battle provides. Pain suppressors have been completely removed and replaced with amplification systems that convert damage into additional sources of stimulation, transforming what should be debilitating injuries into sources of enhanced performance. The servo muscles that provide the armor's enhanced strength have been augmented with synthetic fibers that respond to neural impulses with greater sensitivity than conventional systems. These modifications allow for movements that exceed normal power armor capabilities while providing tactile feedback that enhances the wearer's awareness of their physical actions. The enhanced responsiveness creates a seamless interface between thought and action that makes the armor feel like an extension of the wearer's body rather than external equipment. The collection of trophies and artifacts that Lucius has accumulated throughout his eternal existence represents a catalog of the galaxy's finest warriors and their signature equipment. Each item tells a story of conquest and corruption, their forms often bearing modifications that reflect their current owner's aesthetic preferences while maintaining the functionality that made them valuable prizes. The diversity of these artifacts reflects the broad range of opponents that the Cursed Champion has faced across multiple millennia of warfare. Weapon fragments from defeated opponents are incorporated into the armor's structure as both decorative elements and functional components. Pieces of power swords provide additional cutting edges along the armor's joints, while fragments of alien weapons contribute exotic properties that enhance overall combat effectiveness. These incorporations create a form of evolutionary development where each victory adds new capabilities to the Cursed Champion's arsenal while preserving memories of the encounters that claimed them. The most significant artifacts in Lucius's collection include items taken from opponents whose defeats provided particularly intense sensations or represented major tactical achievements. A fragment of Ferrus Manus's hammer Forgebreaker serves as a shoulder guard ornament, its adamantine construction providing additional protection while serving as a reminder of the Iron Hands Primarch's fall during the Drop Site Massacre. The shard pulses with residual energy when its wearer experiences intense emotions, creating light patterns that reflect the psychological state of its current owner. Alien artifacts from various Xeno species provide capabilities that human-manufactured equipment cannot duplicate. A Tau Pulse rifle's targeting system has been integrated into the armor's helmet, its advanced sensors providing enhanced accuracy for ranged weapons while maintaining compatibility with Imperial and Chaos equipment. The system's machine spirit has been corrupted through prolonged exposure to Chaos influence, its targeting algorithms now prioritizing opponents whose defeat would provide maximum psychological satisfaction rather than optimal tactical advantage. Eldar Soul Stones taken from defeated Aspect warriors serve as focusing crystals for the armor's psychic dampening systems, their original function inverted to enhance rather than protect against warp influence. The stones glow with malevolent light when their wearer channels supernatural energies, their crystalline structure resonating with frequencies that amplify the effects of Chaos blessings. The psychological impact of these corrupted spirit stones on Eldar opponents cannot be quantified, as the sight of their people's sacred artifacts perverted to serve Chaos often breaks their legendary composure. The evolution of Lucius's equipment reflects his growing power and favor with Slaanesh, with each major victory resulting in enhancements that increase his overall combat effectiveness while providing new sources of stimulation. The Prince of Pleasure's gifts manifest as spontaneous improvements to existing equipment rather than entirely new artifacts, creating a form of organic development that builds upon established capabilities rather than replacing them entirely. Recent modifications include sensory enhancement systems that allow the wearer to experience combat through multiple perspectives simultaneously. Neural interfaces connect to the preserved consciousness of victims whose faces adorn the armor, providing tactical input from warriors whose skills and knowledge complement the cursed champion's own abilities. This collective intelligence creates decision-making capabilities that exceed what any individual could achieve while maintaining the personal focus that makes Lucius such an effective duelist. The armor's aesthetic evolution reflects the gradual deepening of its wearer's corruption, with decorative elements becoming increasingly elaborate and disturbing over time. What began as functional modifications have grown into artistic expressions that transform the wearer into a living work of art dedicated to the Prince of Pleasure's glory. The overall effect creates a visual impact that serves as psychological warfare against opponents while providing its wearer with the aesthetic satisfaction that his corrupted nature demands. Weapon maintenance and enhancement occur through rituals that combine traditional Astartes practices with ceremonies dedicated to Slaanesh's worship. These procedures ensure that equipment remains functional while channeling the supernatural energies that enhance their effectiveness beyond normal parameters. The rituals themselves provide forms of stimulation that satisfy the cursed champion's appetites while strengthening the connections between wielder and weapon that make such precise control possible. The Lash of Torment requires particularly specialized maintenance procedures due to its unique construction and supernatural properties. Each segment must be individually consecrated through ceremonies that invoke specific aspects of the Prince of Pleasure's dominion, while the neural interface nodes need regular recalibration to maintain their connection to the wielder's enhanced nervous system. These procedures can take days to complete properly, with each step providing opportunities for the kind of ritualized precision that Lucius's perfectionist nature demands. The integration of new trophies and artifacts into existing equipment follows protocols that ensure compatibility while maximizing the psychological impact of their incorporation. Weapon fragments are positioned to create visual narratives that tell the stories of their former owner's defeats, while functional components are integrated to enhance specific capabilities that complement the cursed champion's combat style. The overall effect creates equipment that serves as both practical tools and artistic expressions of their wielder's achievements. The supernatural properties that many of these artifacts possess create synergistic effects when combined within a single equipment loadout. Chaos-touched metals resonate with warp energies to amplify the effects of supernatural blessings, while alien technologies provide capabilities that exceed their original specifications when exposed to the immaterial forces that flow through their current owner. These interactions create emergent properties that make the combined equipment more effective than the sum of its individual components. The psychological impact of Lucius's equipment on both allies and enemies extends beyond its immediate tactical effectiveness to influence the broader dynamics of any battlefield where he appears. Imperial forces who recognize the artifacts adorning his armor understand that they face an opponent who has defeated some of the galaxy's finest warriors, while Chaos allies see evidence of favor from one of the most powerful entities in the warp. These reactions create battlefield conditions that enhance the cursed champion's effectiveness while serving the Prince of Pleasure's broader strategic objectives. The continuing evolution of Lucius's wargear ensures that his combat capabilities will continue to improve as he accumulates additional victories and artifacts. Each new opponent provides opportunities for equipment enhancement while contributing to the overall aesthetic that makes him such a distinctive figure within the broader Chaos hierarchy. The Prince of Pleasure's investment in maintaining and improving this equipment reflects the value that Slaanesh places on the cursed champion's continued service and the unique capabilities that his eternal existence provides. The impact of Lucius the Eternal on Imperial military doctrine extends far beyond the tactical considerations of individual battlefield encounters, fundamentally altering how the Imperium approaches anti-chaos warfare at strategic and operational levels. His unique resurrection curse has forced Imperial commanders to develop entirely new paradigms for engaging supernatural opponents, moving away from traditional victory conditions based on enemy elimination toward containment and disruption strategies that acknowledge the futility of conventional defeat mechanisms. The Adeptus Munitorum has issued classified tactical manuals specifically addressing encounters with resurrection-capable Chaos champions, with Lucius serving as the primary case study for these specialized doctrines. These documents emphasize the psychological preparation required for forces that might face opponents whose death provides no permanent resolution, while outlining tactical approaches that minimize individual heroics in favor of coordinated suppression efforts. The manuals stress the importance of maintaining operational discipline when facing enemies whose very existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of victory and defeat. Imperial Guard regiments that have encountered Lucius's forces report significant changes in their approach to close combat training, with emphasis shifting from individual prowess to collective action, designed to prevent the kind of personal dueling that triggers the resurrection mechanism. Commissars receive specialized instruction in recognizing the psychological signs that indicate troops are developing the pride and satisfaction that make them vulnerable to the curse, while regimental chaplains conduct purification rituals designed to maintain spiritual focus during encounters with supernatural opponents. The Space Marine chapters have developed perhaps the most sophisticated countermeasures, with several implementing training programs that deliberately suppress emotional responses to combat achievement. The Imperial Fist's Reclusiam maintains extensive archives documenting Lucius's tactical patterns and preferred engagement methods, using this intelligence to develop combat doctrines that emphasize overwhelming firepower over individual skill. Their approach treats encounters with the cursed champion as siege warfare against a fortified position rather than dueling with a skilled opponent, seeking to eliminate him through methods that provide no opportunity for personal satisfaction. The Death Watch has established specialized kill teams trained specifically for anti-resurrection operations, their members selected from chapters whose combat doctrines emphasize emotional detachment and tactical discipline. These teams employ weapons and tactics designed to eliminate targets through coordinated assault rather than individual achievement, with each member's role carefully defined to prevent the kind of personal investment in victory that triggers supernatural curses. The organization maintains detailed psychological profiles of team members to identify those whose temperament makes them suitable for such specialized operations. Within the broader Chaos hierarchy, Lucius's influence extends throughout the scattered warbands of the Emperor's children and beyond, inspiring aspiring champions across multiple legions who seek to emulate his achievements while avoiding the constraints of his curse. His reputation as the galaxy's finest duelist has created a cult of personality that transcends traditional legion boundaries, with warriors from the World Eaters, Night Lords, and even word-bearers seeking to test themselves against standards he has established through millennia of victory. The Emperor's children have developed ritualized combat traditions that explicitly reference Lucius's techniques and achievements, with aspiring champions studying recordings of his duels to identify elements they can incorporate into their own fighting styles. These practices have created a form of martial orthodoxy within the scattered legion, providing common tactical language and shared aesthetic principles that help maintain unit cohesion despite the absence of centralized command structure. The influence of his approach to combat has become so pervasive that many Emperor's children warriors unconsciously adopt his mannerisms and preferred techniques. Chaos cults throughout the galaxy invoke Lucius's name during rituals designed to enhance combat prowess, viewing his eternal existence as proof that exceptional skill can transcend normal limitations through proper devotion to the Prince of Pleasure. These ceremonies often involve elaborate dueling competitions, where participants seek to channel his legendary abilities through imitation and dedication. The most successful cultists report experiencing visions of his greatest victories, claiming that his accumulated knowledge and experience can be accessed by those whose devotion reaches appropriate levels of intensity. The theological implications of Lucius's existence have generated extensive debate among chaos scholars and demon princes who seek to understand the mechanisms that govern his unique form of immortality. His curse represents a departure from conventional relationships between chaos entities and their mortal servants, creating precedents that influence how other dark gods approach champion cultivation and reward distribution. The Prince of Pleasure's investment in maintaining his eternal existence has inspired similar experiments by other chaos entities seeking to create servants with comparable longevity and effectiveness. Prophetic texts discovered within the Eye of Terror reference an eternal warrior whose blade will taste victory until the galaxy's final battle, with many chaos theorists identifying Lucius as the fulfillment of these ancient predictions. The prophecies speak of a champion who will face every worthy opponent across space and time, accumulating knowledge and experience until he becomes the ultimate expression of martial perfection. These interpretations suggest that his current existence represents preparation for a role in the final confrontation between order and chaos that will determine the galaxy's ultimate fate. The concept of the end times within chaos theology positions Lucius as a crucial figure whose accumulated combat experience and supernatural resilience make him uniquely qualified to serve as Slaanesh's primary champion during the final war. His ability to return from death ensures continuity of service regardless of battlefield casualties, while his millennia of victories against diverse opponents provide tactical knowledge that spans every warrior culture the galaxy has produced. The Prince of Pleasure's careful cultivation of his abilities suggests long-term planning that extends beyond immediate tactical considerations. Imperial prophetic traditions, particularly those maintained by the Adeptus Ministorum, contain references to an eternal enemy whose defeat will herald humanity's final triumph over chaos. These texts describe a warrior bearing the faces of the righteous, whose destruction will require sacrifice from the Emperor's greatest champion. The ambiguous nature of these prophecies has led to multiple interpretations, with some scholars suggesting they reference Lucius, while others argue they describe entirely different entities or events. The cultural impact of Lucius within Chaos Space Marine forces extends beyond tactical considerations to influence broader approaches to warfare and personal development. His example has encouraged the pursuit of individual excellence over collective achievement, creating competitive dynamics within warbands that prioritize personal combat prowess above traditional military virtues. This shift has produced warriors of exceptional individual capability while potentially weakening overall unit cohesion and tactical coordination. The aesthetic influence of Lucius's equipment and appearance has spread throughout Chaos forces, with many champions adopting similar decorative elements and trophy displays. The practice of incorporating defeated enemies' equipment into personal wargear has become increasingly common among Slaanesh-aligned forces, creating visual languages that communicate individual achievements while serving as psychological warfare against future opponents. These trends reflect the broader cultural shift toward viewing warfare as artistic expression rather than purely tactical necessity. The Resurrection Curse has inspired numerous attempts by other Chaos champions to develop similar abilities, with varying degrees of success and often catastrophic consequences. Fabius Bile's genetic experiments have included projects designed to replicate the mechanisms that sustain Lucius's existence, while demon princes have petitioned their patrons for comparable forms of immortality. These efforts have generally failed due to the unique circumstances that enabled the original curse's creation and the specific relationship between Lucius and Slaanesh that makes his situation irreplicable. The psychological impact of Lucius's legend on both Imperial and Chaos forces creates battlefield dynamics that extend far beyond his physical presence. Imperial troops who believe they face the cursed champion often experience morale effects that degrade combat effectiveness even when engaging entirely different opponents. Similarly, Chaos warriors fighting alongside forces they believe include Lucius report enhanced confidence and aggression that improves their performance regardless of his actual participation in the engagement. The strategic implications of Lucius's continued existence force both Imperial and Chaos planners to account for variables that transcend normal military considerations. His ability to appear at unexpected locations and times makes long-term strategic planning extremely difficult, while his preference for targeting skilled individuals creates personnel security requirements that strain available resources. The knowledge that defeating him may result in his resurrection within enemy ranks adds layers of complexity to tactical decision making that conventional military doctrine cannot address. As the galaxy enters its darkest hour, with the Great Rift tearing reality apart and demon armies pouring into real space on an unprecedented scale, Lucius the Eternal continues his eternal hunt for worthy opponents and perfect sensations. His legend has become inseparable from the broader narrative of chaos ascendancy, representing both the seductive appeal of corruption and the ultimate futility of resistance against forces that exist beyond mortal comprehension. The faces that adorn his armor now number in the thousands, each representing a moment of triumph that has been transformed into eternal servitude. From the noble houses of ancient Chemos to the finest champions of the modern Imperium, his victims span the entire history of human warfare, while including representatives from every major Xenos species the galaxy has produced. Their preserved consciousness serves as a living library of combat knowledge and tactical experience that makes him an increasingly formidable opponent with each passing century. The curse that binds him to eternal service shows no signs of weakening or evolution, its mechanisms operating with the same precision and inevitability that characterized its first manifestation during the Siege of Terra. Each death and resurrection reinforces the supernatural bonds that tie him to the Prince of Pleasure's will, while each victory adds new dimensions to his understanding of combat and sensation. The eternal nature of his existence ensures that he will continue to serve Slaanesh's purposes until the galaxy's final battle, whenever and wherever that ultimate confrontation may occur. In the end, Lucius the Eternal stands as perhaps the most perfect expression of chaos corruption, a being who has transcended normal limitations through complete surrender to forces beyond mortal understanding, while retaining enough humanity to serve as an effective agent in the material realm. His existence proves that the path to power through chaos worship can lead to forms of immortality that exceed even demonhood in their practical applications, while demonstrating the ultimate price of such elevation through the complete loss of everything that once defined him as human. The galaxy's greatest duelist continues his eternal war, seeking opponents worthy of his blade while serving purposes that extend far beyond his individual ambitions or desires, a living weapon in the hands of entities whose plans encompass the destruction of reality itself.